Chapter 644. The snow on Mount Amos should be quite solid. Generally speaking, there shouldn't be an avalanche. Laurent Claudien was indeed an explorer. Even in the midst of screaming, he still had the energy to analyze the current situation. Anyway, everyone copy me. Cover the back of your head with your hands and lie on the ground. Remember to stick your buttocks up. This way, even if you're buried, there'll be some space to preserve air and not suffocate immediately. Wyler and Duke Emerald Sparrow immediately obeyed his instructions and stuck their buttocks up like him. Are we still going to pretend to be ordinary people in this situation? Su Xinxing looked helplessly at the three buttocks stuck up high in the wooden basin. Even Emily distanced himself from them in disdain. Yes, Charlotte. Well, we're almost there anyway. As long as you don't go overboard, just show a little bit of your strength. The latter pondered for a moment, and when she saw that the avalanche was about to hit them, she finally made a concession. After all, even if Charlotte wanted to continue acting, she still had the restraint of a goddess. She wouldn't want to struggle pathetically in the snow, right? Then I won't hold back. Su Xinxing took a deep breath and raised his fist slightly with a relieved expression, as if his constipation had finally been cured. The next moment, Su Xinxing threw an ordinary punch at the roaring snow-white waves that seemed to want to drown everything in the world. There were no dazzling light effects, nor was there any massive destructive power. It was just as simple as Moses splitting the huge wave of snow and ice into two. Hold on tight, we're going to rush over. Su Xinxing shouted and then pulled the rope on the wooden basin. He went against the flow of the huge avalanche, which was like a waterfall falling 3,000 feet, and ran towards the top of the mountain. What's going on? What the hell is going on? Laurent Claudien, who found that he wasn't drowned by the snow, raised his head and was stunned by the scene in front of him. Both sides of the wooden basin were surging waves of snow. Even the rumbling sound of the huge amount of snow rolling over the mountain was enough to make one feel as if their ears were about to be deafened. However, only the path they were on remained calm. Compared to the horrifying scene on both sides, it was like a completely different world. If you must say, Charlotte replied with a calm smile, just treat it as a miracle. Amazing. Wyler's eyes lit up as he looked at the scene around him. The little boy's thoughts were relatively simple. He was simply admiring this amazing scene that ordinary people would never see in their lives. As for Duke Emerald Sparrow, he stared at Su Xinxing's departing figure with a complex expression on his face. With Su Xinxing the group of, they quickly approached the mountain peak. Because of the avalanche, there was not much snow left. It looked bare and a little ugly. There are traces of an explosion. It's Hongyu. The avalanche just now was caused by Hongyu. Laurent Claudien observed the traces left behind and immediately made a judgment. It seems that Madame He Wanglan really doesn't want others to climb to the top of the mountain. Unfortunately, we're already here. Su Xinxing grinned, then pulled the wooden basin and leaped to the top of the mountain in 2 steps. His appearance was obviously out of Madame He Wanglan's expectations. Those on the top of the mountain who were lying on the ground due to the avalanche were shocked. Golden apple. The moment the wooden basin landed, the sharp-eyed Wyler had already pointed at the golden apple in Madame He Wanglan's hand and shouted, "How dare you!" The brawny man beside Madame He Wanglan shouted angrily and rushed toward the group. In the end, Su Xinxing raised his leg and kicked the man down the mountain. The man's head plunged into the fluffy snow pile due to the avalanche. Only his lower body was exposed, and then he slid down along with the snow that had yet to stop. Those who could follow Madame He Wanglan to the top of the mountain were obviously loyal and not easy to deal with. After the brawny man was killed by Su Xinxing, they did not lose their fighting spirit. Instead, they pulled out their machetes, picked up snow picks, and carefully surrounded Su Xinxing and the others. However, Lady Crane Wanglan did not give up and continued to try. She wanted to use the golden apple to open the place where the legendary gods lived. While Su Xinxing and Charlotte were beating down the people surrounding them, Duke Emerald Sparrow, who had left the wooden basin at some point and crept to Lady He Wanglan's side, suddenly jumped up and knocked Lady He Wanglan over with 2 punches, snatching the golden apple from her hand. Phew. Madame He Wanglan's nose was bleeding. She could only look at him hatefully. It's useless. The only one who can use the golden apple is only the blood descendants of Alan Beerbohm, right? You don't have to wonder why I know this. Duke Emerald Sparrow calmly continued. He shot a disdainful glance at Madame He Wanglan before turning to look at the golden apple in his hand. A look of ecstasy appeared on his face. Because I am the true descendant of that supreme king. He Wanglan, your ancestor was just a servant of my ancestor. Because he heard the legend from my ancestor, he stole the golden apple when my ancestor wasn't paying attention. He's just a despicable person. After saying that, he raised the golden apple high. As if in response to his actions, the tremors of the avalanche stopped. Some faint sunlight appeared in the sky and fell on Duke Chui Kei and the golden apple in his hand, shining brightly. As for you, I will repay you for the humiliation you've caused me. Perhaps the Duke had gained a great deal of courage from the light, but his gaze landed on Su Xinxing and the others, who had already taken care of Lady He Huanglan's servants. Don't worry. Since you brought me the golden apple, I will at least spare your lives. Su Xinxing didn't move. He just looked at Charlotte with a, "This is the good show you were talking about?" Look. Charlotte's expression was even more direct. She seemed to have already regarded him as a dead man. Emily was still calmly eating, as if he didn't care about what was happening outside and only focused on eating the jerky. In the name of the descendant of Beerbohm, God's garden, open the door to me and listen to my wishes. Duke Chui Kei didn't delay any longer. He raised the golden apple and shouted loudly. The wind and snow stopped at this moment. The light of the sun pierced through the dark clouds and turned into thousands of rays of warm light that scattered on the ground. However, other than that, nothing else happened. Duke Chui Kei was stunned for a long time. He unwillingly tried 2 more times, but the result was still the same. Thus, he silently put down the golden apple and covered the back of his head with his hands. He lay on the ground and stuck out his butt. Please don't hit my face. Chapter 645. Why? Duke Emerald Sparrow, whose face was swollen and bruised, was tied together with Lady Crane Huanglan and thrown to the side, muttering unwillingly, "I'm clearly the descendant of Beerbohm, why is this happening?" Unfortunately, apart from Emily, who found a branch from nowhere and squatted on the ground to poke the 2 people, Su Xinxing and the rest's attention was no longer here. The fun you're talking about is the situation of 2 amusing people who thought that they were blessed by the heavens, and after a series of actions, they realized that even the premise was wrong? Su Xinxing asked a certain god. Yes, isn't it very interesting? Charlotte nodded. Observing the amusing behavior of humans is one of the few remaining joys of my existence as the apex of gods. What a bad taste. Su Xinxing's face was full of disagreement. It feels like those evil gods and myths who amuse people for fun. That's not the case. I didn't add fuel to the fire for the 2 people's actions. I was just observing in secret. Everything was their own choice. Charlotte turned a blind eye to Su Xinxing's helplessness and turned to look at Weiler, who was at a loss. Compared to this, it's about time to get to the point. For this little boy, what happened in the past 2 days was completely beyond his scope of understanding. Not to mention Countess Crane Huanglan or Duke Emerald Sparrow, in the past even Lauren Claudian, who was a knight, was not someone a poor orphan like him could approach. After all, the difference in status between the 2 was too great. In addition, in this non-fantasy world without supernatural powers, the solidification of the social class created by the era was almost impossible to break. If it wasn't for the sudden appearance of Su Xinxing and the rest, this child would probably be like this for the rest of his life. What? Seeing Su Xinxing and Charlotte's gaze fall on him, Weiler couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. I'm afraid they want you to open the door. At this moment, Lauren Claudian appeared rather calm. If you think about it carefully, the fact that they brought you along is very strange. After all, I'm the only adventurer to reach the summit of Immerse, and Duke Emerald Sparrow is also a duke. If you think about it this way, the only reason I brought you along is that you fulfilled the requirement to open the legendary Garden of the Gods. Alright, although the knight's guess was full of loopholes due to the lack of information, Charlotte only brought him and Duke Emerald Sparrow because she thought it would be fun. His final conclusion was surprisingly correct. Weiler, you might find it strange, but you're probably the one with the purest Beerbohm bloodline in this world. Charlotte placed the golden apple on the snowy ground in front of the boy and slowly explained to him. In fact, the boy did not find it hard to understand what she meant. His father was a great sage of the ancient times, but his mother's ancestors were secretive and never talked much about it. Combined with the small wooden box that was passed down from generation to generation, which hid Alan Beerbohm's will and belongings, it wouldn't be strange even if he really was a descendant of the Supreme King. But because of that, the boy suddenly felt a sense of resistance. Could it be that the people who were so nice to him along the way were actually using his power to enter the legendary residence of the gods? The golden apple isn't the key to open the door, it's the door itself. The real key is something else. Charlotte continued. Something else. Could it be? Weiler remembered the bird-shaped candle in the box that was passed down from generation to generation. At the same time, the feeling that he was being schemed against became even stronger. Don't worry. Although it's not good to say this, but in fact, due to certain reasons, even if Shiwei and I don't have Burbam's bloodline, as long as we have the walking cuckoo candle, we can still open the golden apple garden. The reason why I'm letting you do it is to fulfill a promise made hundreds of years ago, so that both souls can rest in peace. Charlotte persuaded softly, as if she could see Wyler's resistance. Indeed, if they just wanted to open the hidden space on Mount Amos, whether it was Su Xinxing or Charlotte, as long as they obtained the goddess device, walking cuckoo, the difficulty would be greatly reduced. But Charlotte didn't do that in the end. As a deity, her power was greatly suppressed in this world, but she still possessed a rather wondrous ability. For example, she could faintly sense the strong longing that humans had placed on objects. It was precisely because she sensed the longing of the founder of the Burbam dynasty and a faint presence that she made the decision to let Wyler, a descendant of Burbam, complete the ritual. Perhaps it was difficult for ordinary words to move people who were stubborn, but Charlotte was different. Even though she wasn't in her complete form when she was serious, her words were like the words of a god, possessing magical power. To a mortal like Wyler, it was no different from a wake-up call. I know. So the young boy nodded and took out the candle from his backpack. But soon he was dumbfounded in the howling cold wind. But how do I light a fire in this place? Even if there was, the ultra-low temperature and howling cold wind would extinguish it in seconds, let alone the lack of a suitable starting material. Do you really need to light a fire? Charlotte didn't comment and continued to ask gently. Alan Burbam's last wish was? An idea flashed in Wyler's mind. Then he stuffed the candle into his pocket and used his gloved hands to dig on the ground. Although the accumulated snow on the mountaintop for tens of thousands of years was still snow, the long years of wind and rain had already solidified it as solid as ice. Even after being blasted by Lady Crane Wanglan, there were only a few cracks. One could imagine how difficult it was to dig on such a thing with bare hands. Not only that, but this mountaintop was more than 10,000 meters above sea level. The thin air made breathing difficult, and even ordinary and insignificant movements would cause fatigue several times more than usual. I'll help. Lauren Claudian wanted to help Wyler, but was stopped by Su Xinxing, who was instructed by Charlotte. This isn't something that others can interfere with. Hundreds of years ago, Alan Burbam failed to fulfill his promise with Zhou Wan. His regret and longing before his death passed through time and space at this moment, and entrusted it to his descendant. This was an obsession that belonged only to him. His hands were clearly numb, his breathing was difficult, his physical strength was exhausted, and his body temperature was gradually being taken away by the cold wind. But Wyler still didn't stop. He just knelt on the ground and dug the ground covered by tens of thousands of years of ice and snow. In the end, he really dug a small hole the size of a palm on the ground. But at this time, Wyler finally reached his limit. His whole body fell into the snow like a robot without power. You can't fall asleep. Open your eyes quickly. If you fall asleep in this place, you definitely won't wake up. Lauren Claudian anxiously shouted at the boy. He wanted to help the boy up, but he was blocked by Su Xinxing and the others. In fact, Su Xinxing was also sweating in his heart. He had seen many strong-willed soldiers, but those people were all trained adults. To be able to train their skills meant that they had experienced a long period of arduous training. It wasn't strange for them to have a strong will. But Wyler was just an ordinary child who didn't have any special experience other than these 2 days. To be honest, it wouldn't be strange if he gave up here. After all, there were only a few people who could grit their teeth and break through their limits. Just when Wyler didn't move for a long time, and even Charlotte was about to give up, the boy suddenly moved. He didn't seem to have the strength to stand up again. He just slowly and shakily put the Zhou Wan candle into the hole, and then weakly pushed the pile of ice he dug out back into the hole. But it was enough. The golden apple seemed to have turned on vibrating mode, and it trembled violently. The next moment, a blue beam of light spewed out from the golden apple and rushed into the sky. Then a burst of white light shrouded the entire peak of Mount Amos. At this time, in the eyes of the people at the foot of the mountain and in the vicinity, Mount Amos had turned into a huge world tree. The originally towering peak had now become a straight trunk, and the huge white light that expanded and reflected in the sky was like a tree crown. Countless golden light spots flickered in it like golden fruits. This scene was so shocking that it could be imagined that even hundreds or thousands of years later, this scene would still be passed down in the form of legends in this area. At this moment in the white light, except for Charlotte, Su Xinxing, and Emily, everyone else had disappeared. They weren't dead but had been isolated to another space. No, in a sense, it should be Su Xinxing and the others who were isolated to another space. because there was no doubt that they were now in the legendary divine kingdom, the Golden Apple Orchard. Thank you, sister. In the white light filled with a sense of holiness, a girl slowly appeared. She was leaning on the trunk of an apple tree, smiling at Su Xinxing and the others. If Alan Beerbohm was still alive, he would probably be able to discover that this young girl and the woman who appeared in the traveling cuckoo had the same appearance except for the different hair color, which was golden yellow. Thanks to all of you, the karma between that strand of my soul and this world has finally been resolved. The so-called karma, in the words of immortal cultivation, meant that there was still karma to be settled, and there was no way to leave this place in one piece. Only by settling the karma could one be free of worries. Compared to that, you didn't crash into the world? Su Xinxing looked at her in surprise. And here I thought I could only find your divine core in this place. Shi Wei was right. Your condition is too strange, Moritia. Charlotte sighed, but it was obvious that she was in a good mood. Your presence is spread all over the world, and thanks to this interference, I can't observe the essence of everything more accurately. Or rather, you didn't spread it all over the world, so why is the world filled with your presence? This matter has to be told from an even further time. That's right, from when I transmigrated to this world. Moridia did not intend to keep them in suspense. She casually explained the reason for the matter. Although Mr. Olivia and the rest of you may not have noticed it, in fact, this world is a higher world that has already produced a world consciousness. I didn't feel it. Su Xinxing scratched his face. Since he did not use any world-class combat power, there was no feedback from the world itself. Still, it was rare for a purely technological world to develop a consciousness. Then, when I transmigrated to this world, the world consciousness of this world was planning to destroy all life in this world. Wah. It wasn't just Su Xinxing, even Charlotte was surprised. Generally speaking, the world consciousness would not pay attention to the birth and development of life. After all, life itself was a part of the world. Although there were occasionally worlds that specifically targeted a life or its species and exterminated it, that was because the other party's development had begun to cause harm to the world itself. Normal worlds that killed all life in one go did not exist. Was it corrupted by the great demonic realm? Su Xinxing thought about it, and that was probably the only similar situation that was more likely. Only when the world consciousness was completely corrupted by the madness of the great demonic realm would it develop the idea of eliminating all life. That's not it. The world consciousness of this world is quite healthy. Moritia shook her head and revealed the answer. It's just afraid. Afraid? Charlotte tilted her head quizzically. I don't know the specific situation, but from the information I got after I connected to the world consciousness with the goddess device, Juro, this world seems to think that in the near future, all worlds will be attacked and destroyed by the doomsday. The reason it wants to destroy all life is that when there is no observer in this world, the existence of the world itself will become ambiguous, between reality and illusion. Only in this way can there be a chance to avoid the attack of the doomsday and allow the world itself to continue to exist. Moridia told Su Xinxing and the others the information she had obtained. Although she did not explain what the doomsday was, Su Xinxing immediately thought of the era of destruction. Then could it be? Charlotte seemed to have thought of something and looked at Moritia with some surprise. Well, I took over the authority of Juro and constantly corrected the laws of this world that were distorted by the world consciousness, so that life can avoid the end of extinction. Moritia replied with a bitter smile. So as long as there was life in the vicinity of a planet, they would always be able to sense Mauritius' presence. This was because she had been facing the malice of the entire universe alone, protecting all life in this world. Although it was not important to the gods, her current body had reached its limit. Even standing up and walking had become an extravagant hope. It's the same for the planet under your feet. It should have been swallowed and burned by the nearby star nearly 1,000 years ago, but by constantly modifying the distance between the two that should have gradually closed, this planet was able to survive. Moritia looked a little dispirited. If it's you, sister, you must have a better way. But this is the limit of what I can do. Charlotte remained silent. However, as the only god of many worlds, her status had already surpassed that of the world's creations. If she was independent of the world, she could drag her own world over to help her and use it to communicate with the world's consciousness. She might really be able to tame the other world. But it was too late to say anything now. Originally, it was fine with the help of the goddess device, Walking Cuckoo. But hundreds of years ago, Walking Cuckoo was accidentally lost in the human world. Because she has the ability to instantly reset the part of the laws that I modified, it was too dangerous. So, I had no choice but to separate a part of my soul to look for her. But by chance my soul was attached to Walking Cuckoo. Fortunately, although I could not retrieve Walking Cuckoo in time, I still locked her authority to prevent others from using her. So what are you going to do now? Charlotte asked. I don't know, Moritia answered bluntly. Hey. Charlotte staggered and almost fell. But shouldn't we leave the problem to our leader? Moritia glanced at Emily and frowned slightly. Then she shifted her gaze to Su Xinxing. Didn't our team disband a long time ago? Su Xinxing scratched his head. It's okay. In the hearts of my sister and I, Mr. Olivia, you will always be our leader. The young girl replied with a smile. Then the leader's job is really troublesome, Su Xinxing sighed. Remove Zhu Luo's law modification. I also need to check the situation. Do you really want to remove it? If you remove it, maybe the next moment this planet will directly collide with the star. The life forms in other places will also die in various forms. Speaking of this, Marisha's expression became serious. Then only remove the one on this planet. Su Xinxing did not comment on this. His eyes darkened and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. After all, if the other party doesn't make a move, I can't catch its tail, right? Since it's your wish, then we'll do as you wish. Moritia made her decision almost without any hesitation. So, the next moment, the inhabitants of this planet suddenly found that the temperature seemed to have risen a lot. The star in the sky, which was translated as the sun, had also become much larger. Emoli, protect this planet. Wah! Emoli obediently raised his hands high. Suddenly, a barrier invisible to the naked eye appeared on the periphery of this world. Almost at the same time, the distortion of the worlds will came. In just a moment, this planet was sent to the front of the star, captured by the star's gravity and slowly pulled to the surface of its surface that was more than 6,000 degrees Celsius. But just this moment was enough. Su Xinxing had found one of the countless causes and effects that connected to the world's will. Unknowingly, the holy sword of the End Rolander had appeared in Su Xinxing's hand. As a world, what are you afraid of? He swung the sword. This was not a sword of destruction, but simply cut open the surface of the world, exposing the hidden world's will. The next moment, the entire world's time seemed to have stopped. Fear, panic, fear, all kinds of emotions flowed into his heart along with his sword. These were probably the world's will's fear of the end of the world, or the era of destruction. Counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. It's not easy to have self-consciousness, and it's normal to fear destruction. But if it messes up its own world for an illusory apocalypse, that's just too stupid. Su Xinxing held Rolander high and shouted at the world rift that he had cut open. Don't worry, I'll protect you. It's just the era of destruction. See how I'll deal with it when the time comes. After that, he whispered softly, that's right, it has to be dealt with. The next moment, as if time had reversed, the planet under their feet returned to its original orbit. Chapter 646. World Data Feedback Received. In-depth analysis commencing. Standard data comparison commencing. No abnormal data found. Following Meridia's faint voice, the golden apples in the orchard began to flicker with a strange blue light. A moment later, the light faded away and Moridia returned to normal. She smiled bitterly and shook her head. After being threatened by Mr. Olivia, this world really returned to normal. What is this? Bullying the weak and fearing the strong? In order to prevent this world from destroying all life, just maintaining the operation of the goddess device, Juro, had already caused her to lose all ability to move. For this reason, she even had to seal herself and Juro's body in an alternate dimension to prevent others from looting their corpses. However, after Su Xinxing appeared, he only needed to wave his sword and say a few words to solve the problem that she had not been able to solve for hundreds of years. Bullying the weak and fearing the strong is the instinct of living creatures. Even if it is a world, after gaining consciousness, this is unavoidable, Su Xinxing casually replied. Following the heart and avoiding the harm are essentially the same thing. Compared to this, Moridia, can you still move? Charlotte asked her silly sister. Sorry, sister, I might need a little more time. Moridia shook her head slightly. Using the units that Mr. Olivia is used to, it will take about 5 years. Su Xinxing was speechless. So, was there a problem with the concept of time of the long-lived species? That's a pity. I wanted to ask you to help reseal Emoli. Su Xinxing scratched his head. Based on the current situation, he did not know if Emoli's seal could last for another 5 years. However, even if it could not last for 5 years, at least 2 to 3 years would not be a problem. Compared to this, the upcoming era of destruction was obviously more important. Regardless of whether it was Charlotte or Moridia, Su Xinxing could confide his back to them. So, he simply told them some information about the era of annihilation. There's such a thing? I thought that everything would be fine after dealing with the demonic realm. I was too naive. Charlotte couldn't help but frown. Actually, if you think about it carefully, there is one thing that is very strange. Moridia said aloud. This world feels that the doomsday is coming, so it wants to kill all living things in the world to avoid the doomsday. In other words, the doomsday in its consciousness refers to a catastrophe that can even destroy the world itself, right? Previously, other than the great demonic realm, there was nothing else that could completely destroy a world, so I didn't realize what this apocalypse represented. Maybe it predicted that Shi Wei would come? Charlotte suddenly interjected. If I remember correctly, Shi Wei once wiped out a world too, didn't he? Moridia was speechless. Although he really wanted to retort, when he thought about it carefully, an angry Su Xinxing equals the end of the world, it doesn't seem wrong. Is it that interesting to defame me? Su Xinxing was also embarrassed and complained in dissatisfaction. Anyway, we've dealt with the situation here. Let's retreat. Charlotte ignored Su Xinxing's ridicule with a perfect smile and prepared to leave with Moridia. Are we going back? When Jasmine, who had been chewing on her jerky expressionlessly, heard this, although her expression didn't change much, it gave people the illusion that she was glowing. If this was a manga, the background should have been filled with pink bubbles and little flowers. Then he threw the jerky aside and said to Su Xinxing, Mr. Landlord, I want to eat Chinese crepes. Look at this child, who has been trained by old Su, eating such commoner food. No problem. Su Xinxing, who was in a good mood because he could finally go home, gave her a thumbs up. No problem. About 50. Amoli cheered. And so, old Su began to pretend that he was deaf. By the way, are you planning to go straight back to the Divine Kingdom? He asked Charlotte, who was snickering beside him. Didn't you say that you don't want me to live a mediocre life like I am now? Yes, this trip has made me understand that even if you want to live a mediocre life, it won't be that easy. I'm afraid that all kinds of troublesome things will come to you one after another. Charlotte said with a smile. You've really seen through it all? Speaking of this, Su Xinxing felt a wave of helplessness. He always felt that he had been experiencing all kinds of messy things. That's for sure. If you are a person who has no sense of responsibility and can really turn a blind eye to all the misery in front of you, then you can naturally live a mediocre life. But you are different. Even if you look forward to the happiness of ordinary people, when you see some injustice, you can't help but intervene because of a sense of justice or other reasons, right? Charlotte's smile looked as cunning as a little fox's. After all, you were once a savior. Meddling in other people's business is the quality of a savior. Is this a compliment or an insult? Su Xinxing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It's a compliment. Charlotte replied firmly. In short, I will also use the goddess device to watch the reaction of the nearby worlds. Once there is a clue of the so-called era of destruction, I will leave and contact you. Su Xinxing shrugged. Then I really have to thank you. Then it's settled. The time in this world is a little skewed, so although we have stayed here for a while, not even a day has passed on your Earth. It doesn't matter if we go back now. With that, Charlotte carried Moritia on her back and prepared to leave. At this time, Moritia suddenly said, Sister, wait a minute. I have something to tell Mr. Olivia. Charlotte couldn't help but stop. What is it? Su Xinxing asked curiously. Actually, before I came to this world, I found some scattered clues in other worlds. Moritia took a deep breath. After piecing together those clues, I found that Jiang Bor had left the star field and is looking for someone in the infinite universes. He is looking for me. Su Xinxing remembered what he saw and heard in the world fragment. After all, Jiang Bor's Spear of Seven was still in his hands. He probably has something to say to me. Unfortunately, until the end, I did not see where he was. No, that should be something Jiang Bor started after he found someone. Before looking for you, he had already started looking for someone else. Moritia refuted Su Xinxing's guess. For this, Jiang Bor did not hesitate to break the promise he made and gave up looking after the last orphan of the star field's three-headed dragon. Is that so? Su Xinxing could not help but ponder. After finding someone, he started looking for him. Then who was that someone? If I'm not wrong, Marisha's breathing was a little rapid. The person Jiang Bor was looking for might be Dunia. Su Xinxing was stunned. Chapter 647. Careful. Su Xinxing came back to his senses and found that Song Yu was looking at him worriedly. What happened? Why have you been in a daze since you came back? The girl asked with concern. It had been 3 days since they found Moridia and returned to Earth. During these 3 days, no matter what Su Xinxing did, he would often be distracted, so it was normal for Song Yu to feel worried. It's nothing. Don't worry. Su Xinxing smiled perfunctorily. However, what Moridia said before she left kept replaying in his mind. Dunya is still alive. No, perhaps it should be said that she was resurrected. That day, Moridia said to Su Xinxing seriously. Impossible. Dunya's status is too high. Even if we use some things in the world that have the ability to resurrect, she can't come back to life. Su Xinxing said with a conflicted expression. He was full of hope but afraid of hearing fake news, so he couldn't believe it. That's right. Perhaps for an ordinary world, whether it's resurrection spells, resurrection elixirs, or soul-returning incense, in theory, it's impossible to resurrect Dunya. After all, she was also Yuan Yang's child. If she didn't die too early, she would have definitely become a member of the counterattack against the Great Devil Realm. Moridia nodded. But the prerequisite for this theory is the ordinary spellcaster of the ordinary world. What if the person who did this was also a member of the hero squad? What did you say? Who the hell? Su Xinxing was shocked. Putting aside the 7-person team that counterattacked the Great Devil Realm, there were more than 20 people in the hero squad before that. Although they couldn't do this in the past, it didn't mean that they couldn't do it now. After all, those people were the elites of the world. To be honest, even Su Xinxing wasn't sure how strong they had become in the past few years. Although it's just my speculation based on the clues in Jiang Bor's notes. Jiang Bor seems to think that the person who did this is Anton Helbart. Moridia waited for Su Xinxing to calm down a little before answering. Anton. If it's that guy, more than 9,000 worlds had gathered together and successfully counterattacked the Great Devil Realm. There were a total of 7 people in the brave squad. The peerless hero Su Xinxing, the silver dragon of origin, Song Ashua, the goddess of twin children, Charlotte Moriarty, and the darling of the world, Jiangbo Kompencheth. Anton Helbart was one of the remaining 2. She was the strongest bestowment warlock in history, the hero's brain trust, and a powerful person who could create laws and mend the world with just support magic. It should be known that in the early days of his time travel, Su Xinxing's strength was not strong enough to beat everything. He was also racking his brains because of the intrigue in the Human Alliance army. After the Princess of Olivia joined the team, Su Xinxing's burden in this regard was greatly reduced. After Anton Helbart joined the team, old Su didn't use his brain much anymore. He left all the thinking and planning to Anton, and he basically emptied his mind and acted recklessly. In the end, he finally defeated the Great Devil Realm. Although Su Xinxing didn't know if it was a special case or not, in his experience, all the wise men he met had a hard time, and Anton was no exception. The first half of this guy's life was basically spent alone in the study of magic. When he was young, he was abandoned as a bad omen because his precociousness was too scary. When he grew up into a teenager, he actively avoided contact with other people because whether it was adults or children, they were all stupid in his eyes. His superiority in IQ made this guy too lazy to deal with ordinary people. When he was about 20 years old, he had understood all the mysteries of the magic of that era and began to explore the unknown. In this situation where he maintained absolute rationality for many years, he gradually lost his human emotions. In fact, until later, when he gave the mission description, he basically started with, "Sorry, I don't understand people's hearts, so the following plans are all based on calculations." However, when Su Xinxing finally persuaded this guy, in fact this guy wanted to go to other worlds to obtain new knowledge and thus hitched a ride with Su Xinxing, to join the team and defeated more than 9,000 lattice worlds, Anton met his love. She wasn't a human but the world consciousness of a lattice world. Regardless of how the two of them got along, Anton had indeed gradually regained his human emotions because of the world's consciousness. After that, Anton even looked for Su Xinxing alone, hoping that Su Xinxing could let him leave the team and settle down in that world. Of course, Su Xinxing agreed. Unfortunately, that world was one of the first lattice worlds captured by the Great Devil Realm and had long turned into the shape of the Great Devil Realm. Even though Su Xinxing and the others defeated the Demon King's army inside the world eventually collapsed because the Great Devil Realm absorbed too much of its origin energy. That was why Anton's strategy was more radical when he counterattacked the Big Devil Realm, and the hero team was almost annihilated. After Su Xinxing finally defeated the Great Devil Realm, this guy also quickly left the team and disappeared without a trace. Anton seemed to be looking for a way to revive that world. And he seemed to have found a way. Moridia continued after Su Xinxing came back to his senses. Dunya was his test subject. However, after Anton revived Dunya, he didn't plan to take care of her. Instead, he spread the news through some channels and seemed to be looking for you. You know that Jiangbo admires you the most. After knowing this, you naturally gave up on your promise and followed the clues left by Anton to find Dunya? I see. Su Xinxing sighed. Anyway, thank you. End of memory. To be honest, if it was a normal situation, Su Xinxing wouldn't be so worried. The problem was that Jiang Bo, who was once a member of the Brave Squad and could still be regarded as the peak combat power of a normal world even after leaving the Spear of Seven, was dead. The cause of death was unknown. Therefore, the situation became a bit confusing. Had Dunya been resurrected? If she had been resurrected, had Jiang Bo found her? And what was her current situation? It would be a lie to say that Su Xinxing wasn't worried. Otherwise, with old Su's temperament, he wouldn't have been so distracted these 2 days. Speaking of which, where's Xingyan? Why haven't I seen her in the past 2 days? Song Yu probably wanted to make Su Xinxing relax a little, so he took the initiative to talk about unrelated topics. I asked her to go to Kunlun to find Bai Zhe to help me calculate something. Su Xinxing stared blankly at the sofa where Emoli was playing with the canine girl. Although I can go by myself, I feel that if I go with Emoli that Lu Wu will go crazy. Is that so? Song Yu, who had never been to Kunlun, was confused. Chapter 648. At that moment, there was a sudden knock on the door of Sakura's apartment. Is Xingyan back? Su Xinxing's eyes lit up and he immediately asked Emoli to open the door. But I refuse. The little rascal rejected old Su's call without hesitation, then continued to stroke the dog chick's stomach. Dog chick? Haha, so itchy, and play with her. Is this girl getting lazier and lazier? Where did she learn this from? This made Su Xinxing, who was lying on the table, sigh helplessly. He didn't notice Song Yu's complicated gaze. Let me open the door. Song Yu smiled bitterly, stood up and walked towards the entrance. When she opened the door, she found that the person was not Qin Xingyan, but a black-haired loli wearing a cap. Huh. Song Yu, who had never seen her before, was confused. Who are you looking for? I'm looking for. Ah, Mr. Xinxing. Just as the loli was about to answer, she smiled cutely behind Song Yu. This made Song Yu subconsciously turn around, and she found that Su Xinxing had arrived at the entrance, and even Emoli was with him. Hey Jiangyun, long time no see. Su Xinxing even greeted her. Do you know each other? Song Yu blinked her big eyes and asked curiously. About the same time as I've known you. Su Xinxing thought for a moment, then replied. Yes, long time no see, Mr. Xinxing. Emoli. Oh, Jiangyu. Jasmine, on the other hand, had already hugged her. The soft cheeks of the two Lolas stuck together, looking like cotton candy squeezed together. It was exceptionally soft and cute. Oh no, an unexpected strong enemy. Song Yu saw Su Xinxing's rare kind smile on his face, but it was more like a pervert smile and she was shocked. Considering that Su Xinxing was suspected of being a lolicon, Jiang Yu suddenly became a threat in her heart, and was even ranked above Qin Xingyan. What's the matter this time? If it was someone like Xiao Jingyi or Su Feng who came looking for Su Xinxing when he was upset, he would most likely tell them to get lost. But it was Jiang Yu, so naturally old Su became more amiable. It wasn't because he was a lolicon, but because many people couldn't help but become gentle when talking to cute pets. It was almost the same principle. I don't have anything special, but didn't Mr. Xinxing and the boy named Yi Qing to pick them up in a month's time? Jiang Yu said in her usual gentle voice. A depressed woman came to the museum today. She seemed to have been dragged here by her friend to change her mood. Although I didn't mean to eavesdrop, according to their conversation, that woman should be Yi Qing's mother. Yi Qing hasn't returned home yet and she's very worried. That's why I came to ask. Oh. It took half a minute for Su Xinxing to remember who Yi Qing was, and he showed an awkward expression. About half a year ago, Su Xinxing, who was turned into a cat by Mo Li, was carelessly summoned to a lattice world he had saved with 3 young boys and girls from Earth. Because of various reasons, they were involved in the war between the humans and the demons in that world. Although Su Xinxing and Jasmine managed to stop the war between the humans and the demons by scaring them in the end, the situation was still not optimistic. Therefore, Yi Qing and the others volunteered to stay in that world and help the indigenous warriors deepen the relationship between the two races. Su Xinxing also made an appointment with them to bring them back after 1 month on Earth. However, a lot of things happened during the process of returning to Earth. Even after returning to Earth, all kinds of messy situations happened one after another, making Su Xinxing a little tired. He accidentally forgot about the 3 little guys. After concealing the part about the cat, Su Xinxing told Song Yu the whole story. I see, this kind of thing happened before. Song Yu seemed to be a little excited. She looked at Jiang Yu, who was still in the state of being hugged by Emoli. Miss Emoli, I feel like I can't breathe. Jiang Yu protested weakly. Of course she was ignored by Emoli. Okay, so you stay in Sakura Apartments for now. Emoli and I will go to that world to bring them back. Su Xinxing asked Emoli to find the magic coordinates he left in that world, and at the same time confirmed the situation with Jiang Yu. He planned to go to the museum again to get River Moon. Song Yu wanted to say something, but in the end she showed a gentle smile and said, okay, be careful on the way. Su Xinxing looked at her, hesitated for a moment and then invited the girl, why don't you come with us? That world is average but the scenery is not bad. Ah, Song Yu looked at Su Xinxing in surprise. This was probably the first time he invited her to go to a place with him. In the past, Song Yu was afraid that she would get in the way of Su Xinxing, so she never took the initiative to go to those places with him. Su Xinxing was also afraid that Song Yu would get hurt, so he never took the initiative to invite her. But this time the world shouldn't be too dangerous. After all, whether it was the human side or the demon side, their leaders were all people she was familiar with. Then, the girl's eyes were filled with tears as she answered excitedly. I'm willing. Don't be so excited. Send a message to Xingyan and the others first, in case they can't get in touch with us and cause trouble. Su Xinxing ordered. Okay. Song Yu naturally did as she was told. After changing the River Moon in the museum to a 4K projection, courtesy of Emoli, the group rode the River Moon and once again entered the Sea of Ether, heading towards the Lattice World. Although that was what he said, in reality after leaving the world barrier of the world where Earth was, Old Su sent the River Moon to the world where I Ching and the others were based on the beacon that Emoli left behind. The weather in this world doesn't seem too good today. As soon as they entered that world, the rolling dark clouds and the occasional flash of lightning gave Song Yu a fright. In fact, if Su Xinxing didn't cast a shield on the River Moon in time, the lightning would have struck them. There's something wrong with the thunderclouds. Old Su frowned. Could it be that this simple sightseeing trip would encounter some trouble? Jiang Yu prepared to land. What's wrong? Song Yu was a little uneasy. After all, compared to the others at Sakura Apartments, she had never seen such a scene. It's okay, don't worry, no matter what happens, Su Xinxing smiled at her, I will bring you back safely. Chapter 649. On the desolate land, the northern wind blew, rolling up a cloud of gray dust. The sky was covered by strange black clouds. It was not the kind of clouds that were naturally formed, but like the internal organs of a creature, constantly wriggling and spreading malice to the area covered. The malice would condense into tangible black dust like snowflakes falling from the clouds, but unlike real snowflakes, this black dust was more deadly than strong acid. Without the protection of divine power, if an ordinary person walked under this black dust, they would be quickly eroded and infected, and finally turned into a pile of dust. The change started a year ago. At that time, I Ching was still busy because of the friction between the humans and demons, and the integration of the two races was not smooth. Therefore, although Mr. Savior did not come to pick him up as promised, he did not care too much. Until one day, a dazzling meteor that could be seen even in the daytime cut through the sky and finally fell on the green field. For a time, the residents of this world were in a panic, thinking that the invader who used only a shadow to almost defeat the two armies of the humans and demons 2 years ago had finally begun to invade this world. Only a few people like I Ching who knew the inside story did not think much of it, thinking that it was just a coincidence. After all, in their understanding, Su Xinxing, who saved the world and even took the blame for the reconciliation between the humans and demons, would not do such a thing. Both sides sent out scouts to investigate the mysteries of the falling meteorite. In the end, the information they obtained was very simple. What fell from the sky was naturally not some terrifying great demon king, but a huge, sparkling and translucent crystal. In the end, the facts told them that things were not that simple. A few days after the meteor fell, with the green field as the center, the whole world began to be infected by the evil power, and everything seemed to have changed. The vegetation gradually withered, animals became crazy and full of aggression. Even the humans, demons, were not spared from this disaster, and were dominated by the unknown evil power. If that was all, it would be fine, at most it would become a different world's version of Resident Evil. For people like I Ching who came from Earth and had seen a lot of zombie movies, this was not a particularly troublesome situation. What really made them feel helpless was not that humans had become walking corpses that could attack others, but that they had become like children's doodles. They did not have a definite outline, as if they were a combination of countless bad lines. They were monsters that had lost their flesh and human form. Humans had no way to defeat the enemy. Be it swords, arrows, fire, ice, lightning, or even a full-powered strike imbued with the power of a demon king or a hero could not destroy these things. All they could do was simply beat the monsters until they lost their external form, and this state that would take at most a day to recover was not even a heavy blow to these monsters. This almost invincible power also caused some strange voices to appear among the human survivors. Some of the survivors seemed to think that the humans, demons, did not become like this because they were dead, but because they had evolved to a new stage. This was a right that all humans should enjoy, and they should not be avoided like snakes and scorpions. These survivors formed a cult and began to go against the temporary government agencies formed by humans and demons to deal with the current situation. Fortunately, these people left the sanctuary not long after and were infected by the forces of the outside world and turned into monsters. Based on the current situation, the monsters they became were no different from the ones they had become before. As time went by, the situation of the temporary coalition government of humans and demons became worse and worse. Under the leadership of Xia Shuiyao, the almost new church was almost unable to suppress the evil forces in the outside world, and the materials of the survivors began to deplete, and a large-scale famine could strike at any time. The clouds of despair and destruction had shrouded everyone's head. For this reason, I Ching had to take some soldiers who had written their wills to the outside world to find usable materials to cover the expenses. "Did you find anything useful?" I Ching asked as he looked at Lin Chanshan's team who came back from the other direction. "Nothing. That place has been destroyed by the demonic beast." Lin Chanshan sighed as her shoulders drooped. She seemed to be in a bad mood. "What about you?" In fact, it was not that there was nothing. Some of the soldiers behind Lin Chanshan were holding some food that could be preserved for a long time. However, compared to the entire refugee city, this amount of resources was not even a drop in the bucket. "It's about the same here." I Ching looked serious as he took out an inverted triangular pendant from his pocket. The pendant exuded a white glow, but if one looked closely, one would find that nearly 2/3 of the pendant's white jade-like texture had turned black. "The talisman can't hold on for much longer. At most, we can only wait for 3 more teams for half an hour." This time, we also returned without any results. Lin Chanshan's mood was even worse. She kicked a pebble on the ground like a child in a fit of pique. "We are lucky to be able to return in one piece." I Ching smiled bitterly as he comforted her. Suddenly, Braveheart's expression froze. He turned around and pulled out the longsword on his back. His action immediately triggered the tense nerves of the soldiers. They all pulled out their weapons. Even Lin Chanshan picked up her small wand. A moment later, a few soldiers appeared in the direction where visibility was low due to the black snow. They were running towards them and their figures looked quite pathetic. "It can't be." Lin Chanshan tried to use her perception to sense the thing that was chasing them. She couldn't help but gulp. She didn't know if it was fear or confusion on her face. The next moment, those things appeared in front of everyone's eyes. They were creatures that were born after several humans were infected. No, perhaps it was not accurate to describe them as living creatures. They were monsters that were difficult to describe with words. It was as if a person had scribbled on them. Their bodies were made up of countless twisted lines, and they did not have a specific outline. The size of the monsters ranged from those that were slightly larger than monkeys to those that were as large as moving villas. There were all kinds of monsters. I Ching quickly estimated the combat strength of the two sides and came to a conclusion. There was no chance of winning. What are the guys in the third group doing? They actually lured the monsters here. Have they forgotten the outdoor drill? Aren't they going to drag us down with them? Some of the soldiers had already started to complain noisily. I Ching understood them. In fact, before they departed from the refugee city, the city defense officer had told him that it was better to let the soldiers die outside than to lure the monsters near the city. This was what the soldiers agreed on from the beginning. The high salary and the ability to enjoy abundant supplies at a time when supplies were scarce were all for this moment. However, everyone's awareness was different. Situations like the third group were not uncommon. After all, not everyone could overcome the fear of death. "Everyone get ready to retreat. Lin Chanshan, I'll leave it to you," I Ching said loudly. He was about to rush in the direction of the third group. "Idiot I Ching, what are you doing?" Lin Chanshan panicked and grabbed I Ching's clothes. "If you want the others to escape, someone has to stay behind and stop those things." I Ching turned around and said seriously. As a hero, although he couldn't kill those things, he could still stop them. However, whether he could make it back in one piece was another matter. You'll die. There's a stage 4 monster in there. Lin Chanshan shook her head hard. And if you become one of those things? Don't worry, I'm different from the others. The former hero's familiar, Xiao He, seemed to have left something on me. Compared to the others, I'm the least likely to be infected. Although Su Xinxing didn't reveal the battle god's blessing until the end, Yi Qing wasn't an idiot. After training in the other world for so long, he had already vaguely noticed the existence of the blessing. But, Lin Chanshan wanted to say something, but Yi Qing put his finger on her lips. The former hero didn't come here to pick us up as promised. I'm afraid he was delayed by something similar. Since he chose to pass on this power to me, I can't let him down. The young man said to Lin Chanshan gently but firmly. I'll leave these people to you. Make sure they make it back to the city safely. Okay. In the end, the girl nodded reluctantly and left with the soldiers. But before she left, she looked at him deeply as if she wanted to imprint his figure in her mind. After watching the girl's figure disappear into the black snow, Yi Qing smiled bitterly and muttered to himself, I actually took advantage of her feelings. I'm really bad. But soon his eyes became determined again. He let the soldiers of the 3rd squad run past him. It was hard to say if they could make it back to the city alive, but at least there was a chance. Yi Qing looked at his trembling hands and faced the attacking monsters alone with his sword. He took a deep breath. In the name of the current hero, Yi Qing, I will never let you hurt anyone. Come at me. Chapter 650. The process of the battle was cruel and boring. No matter how powerful the sword strike was, it could not cut through the enemy's body. Attacking skills were also completely ineffective. Even if the enemy's appearance collapsed into a disorderly line, it would regenerate after a while. It was not an ability like enhanced regeneration or immortality. It was just that his attacks were completely ineffective. That's right. Although it looked like he was causing damage to the enemy, the fact was that the enemy was simply reacting after being hit. It was not a sign that the attack was effective. In fact, as one of the top combatants in this world, Yi Qing had not fought with these things for a long time. Under normal circumstances he would mostly avoid them. This time was the same. If the situation was not so critical, he would not want to fight with the enemy. After experiencing the collapse of the world's order, these top combatants had long understood that the enemy could not be killed. Every time he fought with these things, it would only deepen the helplessness and despair in his heart. Many of the originally proud and arrogant combatants were defeated by the despair after realizing this. They chose to give up resisting and were infected by the evil intent, becoming one of these monsters. Cough cough. In a moment of carelessness, Yi Qing was kicked by a huge monster the size of a villa. Even if he used his weapon to block the monster's huge foot at the critical moment, the teenager was still sent flying by the powerful force. He bounced on the ground for more than 10 meters before he stopped rolling. He coughed a few times and felt a dull pain in his chest slowly spreading. Was it a broken rib? Before he could catch his breath, the smaller monsters had already swarmed over. They were not in an orderly manner. It was as if they were simply fighting for something. They swarmed and tried to use their strange bodies to entangle and tear Yi Qing apart. From this point, it could be understood that these monsters did not have an ant queen acting as a commander. This was both a good and a bad thing. The good thing was that they did not have a unified will to command them. These things' actions were disorderly and aimless. It was common for them to clash with each other. If this was not the case, all the monsters needed to do was to charge and even the most advanced sanctuary city would fall in an instant. The reason why it was a bad thing was obvious. Without an ant queen or something like that, there was no way to eliminate the entire enemy in one go. Once a person's body was touched by them, the body would immediately show signs of corrosion as if it was being corroded by black snow. It was not the decay of the body because no matter what method was used to diagnose the wound, it would come to the conclusion that the injured person was quite healthy. It was the corrosion of the soul on a deeper level. However, before they were completely contaminated and turned into monsters, many people were torn apart by these monsters. I don't know what kind of monster I am. As the pain in his chest became more and more severe, Yi Qing's basic offensive and defensive movements began to change. This brought about a few consecutive touches on his body. His outer cloak had begun to rot, and his exposed skin had also begun to show signs of corrosion. It was like a special kind of burn. The outer layer of his skin was dark, and the middle layer of his skin was covered with yellowish spots of new pink flesh. A tingling and itchy feeling came from the wound. It even gave I Ching the illusion that he was gradually being infected. No, I can't hold on any longer. This is my limit. I Ching sighed and tried to retreat. However, because he had stayed here for too long and the battle was quite intense, many of the surrounding monsters had been lured out. Now he was surrounded by monsters. He tried to break out of the encirclement a few times, but all ended in failure. The wounds on his body were increasing. Looking around at the densely packed monsters, I Ching finally realized that there was no way for him to escape. Looks like this is the best I can do. The young man leaned on his sword and lowered his head. The necklace around his neck also drooped because of this action, but the pendant on it had completely turned black. With a crisp sound, the pendant shattered with a bang. The protection from Xia Shuiyao's holy power had completely disappeared. The black snowflakes finally came into contact with I Ching. Every snowflake that fell on him brought with it a pungent smoke and a sizzling sound like barbecued meat. It was all over. But for some reason I Ching did not feel the slightest fear in his heart. Even if I can't fight you now, one day, people will find a way to suppress you things. I Ching looked up and shouted at the monsters. He did not have much stamina left. In fact, he could barely stand now, but the enemies were still tirelessly swarming towards him. The young hero shouted with all his might. Then we will rise again, and in the end, it will be the victory of the humans. After saying that, he placed the chipped long sword against his own neck. He decided that even if he had to face hundreds of monsters, he would at least die in this place with his human body. Just at this moment. Good willpower, but you still lack the unyielding spirit of longing and hope to stand until the end. A voice that he had never heard before, but felt familiar to him sounded beside him. What followed was an incomparably loud whistle that would never appear in this world. In the next moment, the crowd of monsters that surrounded him was like the sea being parted by Moses, and a wide road appeared in the middle. The pitch-black steam locomotive sped through the middle, then drifted to a stop beside the young man. Mr. Brave Warrior. Seeing the face that left a deep impression on him, I Ching's legs went weak and he knelt on the ground. The pleasant surprise of escaping from death's door caused the little bit of strength left in his body, which was originally prepared to die, to be sucked out. His entire body was about to fall to the ground. At this moment, Su Xinxing had already appeared beside him and brought the wounded young man to Mo Li's side. Wow, what happened? Song Yu was still confused by the current situation. She hugged the expressionless Mo Li tightly like she was hugging a doll. Mo Li, protect River Moon. In fact, River Moon had already been blessed by Su Xinxing with the blessing of the sacred domain. Otherwise, it would not be able to be used as a vehicle to travel between worlds, so the black snow did not affect it at all. But because the enemy was a bit special, just in case, Su Xinxing still told Mo Li, "Leave it to me." The expressionless Jasmine who was being held in his arms replied. So Su Xinxing stood in front of everyone and faced the black tide of monsters. Mr. Brave Warrior, be careful of those monsters, they can't be killed. I Ching struggled to sit up and leaned against River Moon's window to warn Su Xinxing. Ah, that's probably the case for you guys. Su Xinxing turned to look at I Ching at a 45-degree angle. No, it's about the same for me until half a year ago. Then he punched out and the black tide of monsters seemed to have crashed into an invisible wall. Not only did it abruptly stop, it was even sent flying back. The few monsters at the front were also reduced to ashes. That's right, they did not collapse into lines but completely disappeared. Those who have not experienced or witnessed the age of destruction cannot harm it. Did they send me to Seve Adrian's world just to set the stage for this? Even if it's just the aftershocks or the echoes, it counts as having witnessed the age of destruction. Could it harm these things that are also the aftershocks? Su Xinxing retracted his fist and looked at the monsters that attacked again without fear. He muttered to himself, "No, for me in this world, these guys should be an omen. An omen from the age of destruction." Chapter 651. With Lake Isabella at its back, Clearwater City was the world's largest refugee city. Due to the influx of refugees, Jade Water City, which was originally a major trading city, had expanded quite a bit. However, due to the scarcity of construction materials, the expanded parts of the city were similar to the slums. Thus, if one were to look down from the sky, the grayish border area, which was far larger than the main city, gave off the feeling of a spreading mold. In the center of the main city, the building that was originally used as a clock tower had now been expanded into a small castle. A white glow overflowed from the highest point of the castle, and finally formed a hemispherical shield over the city to prevent the residents of the refugee city from being harmed by the black snow falling from the sky. In the room of the steeple, a 32-sided sphere the size of a durian was hanging from the ceiling, and a silver-haired girl was kneeling on the floor below the sphere. Her head was bowed, and her fingers were clasped together in a praying posture. Holy light flowed from her body, and her appearance could not help but make people think of words like angel and goddess. Holy power, this was discovered 2 years ago and was a power similar to magic. After the mutation, holy power was also proven to be one of the few powers that could resist the corrosion of the black snow. Miss Ya, it's time to change shifts. A few people in white cloaks came up from the stairs at the edge of the room. Those who knew about the new church would know that the patterns on the white cloaks meant that they were bishops of the new church who had great holy power. The old church had collapsed 3 years ago. This was the core of the refugee city, and through the ancient magic core above the room, the holy power spread out to form a protective shield to protect the city. Without this, Clearwater City would soon become a dead city like the outside world, a purgatory on earth. The girl was naturally Xia Shuiyao, who had transmigrated with I Ching. After the discovery of the holy power, she was quickly identified as having the gift of the holy power that no one in this world could ever hope to achieve. Usually it would require 32 bishops to pray together in this small room, but she could do it alone. Even the strength of the shield was far stronger than when 32 people were in the same state. However, she was still a human after all and could not support the shield without rest, so it was necessary to change shifts. All right. Xia Shuiyao stood up from the ground. She couldn't help but look a little tired. She patted the dust off her skirt and planned to leave the room. But when she was walking towards the stairs, she seemed to have thought of something and stopped. She asked the leader of the bishops, "Oh right, I Ching and the rest should be back by now, right?" The bishop's face stiffened as if he didn't know how to respond. Although Xia Shuiyao had been silent the whole time, she was actually quite sensitive. She realized what had happened almost instantly. She didn't make things difficult for him. Instead, she turned around and ran towards the stairs. "Miss Ya, let's go to the Princess Royal's residence. You should be able to understand what happened there." The bishop finally couldn't stand the condemnation in his heart and said to the girl. The latter just nodded and disappeared from the corridor. Because the capital had already fallen, the Frost Eagle Empire's royal family could only move to Jade Water City. Although that was the case, in reality the only surviving member of the royal family was the eldest princess. However, the eldest princess didn't build a luxurious building in this difficult time for the sake of the royal family's reputation. She only requisitioned a wealthy merchant's villa near the city center as her own residence. When Xia Shuiyao arrived at the eldest princess' residence, she found Lin Qianxi and the eldest princess talking about something. Both of their expressions were heavy and gloomy. It seemed that the content of their conversation wasn't something pleasant. Lin Qianxi. After all, they had been together for 3 years. The three of them were so familiar with each other that they didn't need to add classmate, or something like that behind their names. Xia Shuiyao went straight to the point and asked, "Where is I Ching? Didn't he lead a team to search for supplies with you today?" Lin Qianxi's face darkened visibly. She bit her lips hard and didn't say anything. Xia Shuiyao's face was solemn as she stared at her without saying a word. After a while, Lin Qianxi seemed to use all her strength to squeeze out a sentence from her throat. "We encountered the spirit of chaos. I Ching was covering for us." Although she couldn't finish her sentence in the end, Xia Shuiyao already knew what she was going to say. The blood drained from the girl's face in an instant, and she turned ghastly pale. She looked deeply at Lin Qianxi, her eyes full of disappointment. Then she ran towards the door without looking back. "Wait a minute, Miss Xia, where are you going?" The eldest princess of the Frosthawk Empire could not help but ask anxiously. "To save I Ching. Please don't be so impulsive. I will immediately prepare a rescue plan for Mr. I Ching. As a precious clergyman, for your own safety, Miss Ya should stay in the safety of Clearwater City and wait for news." The eldest princess hurriedly tried to stop her. To be honest, at this point, the eldest princess felt that I Ching's chances of survival were very slim. After all, those monsters, which were also known as the spirits of chaos, couldn't be killed. So when facing them, the right choice was to lure them to a place with more complicated terrain and then escape after getting rid of their pursuit. However, according to Lin Qianxi's description, it was almost impossible to escape alone from dozens of spirit of chaos, and there were also several stage 3 spirit of chaos. The only thing I Ching could do was try his best to stall them. And the fact that he had not returned to Clearwater City until now proved this point. No matter how powerful a warrior was, there was a limit to their stamina and energy. Sooner or later they would show weakness due to exhaustion and finally be killed. The fall of countless powerful warriors in the early days of the Cataclysm had already proved this point. Even I Ching, a hero from another world, was no exception. In that case, at the very least, Xia Shuiyao, who was currently very important to Clearwater City, should be protected. Her Royal Highness did not ignore I Ching's life. In fact, when I Ching helped Finn and the others to end the war between the humans and the demons 3 years ago, the girl had already secretly fallen in love with this man from another world. However, she was a member of the Frosthawk Empire's royal family and the current highest leader of Clearwater City. Her every word and action was related to the lives of more than 300,000 people in Clearwater City. When she made decisions, she had to do her best not to mix in personal feelings, which sometimes made her seem even more ruthless. Your Royal Highness? No, perhaps I should call you Her Majesty now. You seem to be mistaken about one thing. Xia Shuiyao finally stopped, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she used a rare icy tone to say, I'm staying here not because of how well you treat me or how many people I can protect or save here. It's purely because I Ching is here. The other 2 girls in the room looked at each other, speechless. Then, since I Ching is no longer here, I naturally will not continue to stay here. Xia Shuiyao did not have any misgivings about the others' feelings and only continued to say, for the current me, the most important thing is not whether it is too late to go now, but whether I can save him. After saying this, the girl took another step forward. Wait a moment. The eldest princess loudly shouted. Her eyes became sharp. This princess will definitely not let young Miss Ya send herself to death. Even if I have to use force, I will make you stay. Guards. As soon as she finished speaking, several fully armed guards rushed in from outside the door. Your Majesty, you don't think that these few people can stop me, do you? Xia Shuiyao's tone became even colder. Even if she was the weakest in I Ching's group, after nearly 3 years of experience, Xia Shuiyao's strength could be considered as one of the top in the world. Not to mention a few soldiers, even if she brought out an army of 10,000 people to train, it was still uncertain who would win. This princess naturally does not think that a few ordinary people would be a match for Miss Xia, so... Her gaze fell on Lin Chanchan. I would like to ask Miss Lin Chanchan to stop Miss Xia from leaving here. I believe that you do not want to see your friends die in vain at the hands of the spirit of chaos, right? As soon as she said this, Xia Shuiyao, who seemed to be careless, immediately became serious. She turned around and stared at Lin Chanchan, an invisible saint power also rising from her body. Admittedly, Xia Shuiyao was now quite powerful, but in terms of combat strength, she was still the weakest among I Ching's group. Once Lin Chanchan became serious, it would not be easy for her to leave this place. Lin Chanchan's expression was slightly sluggish, then she raised her hand towards Xia Shuiyao. In the next moment, the few soldiers behind Xia Shuiyao were all sent flying by an invisible force, falling to the ground and losing consciousness. Miss Lin Chanchan. The Princess Royal was stunned, then she looked at the instigator in astonishment. At this moment, Lin Chanchan's expression was as if she had figured something out and was suddenly enlightened. Yes, I almost forgot my original intention. Shuiyao, let's go save I Ching together. As expected of my eternal rival. Xia Shuiyao revealed a rare smile. Are you all crazy? The Princess Royal could not help but yell in annoyance. But Xia Shuiyao and Lin Chanchan ignored her. At this moment, a piercing alarm suddenly came from outside. Along with the alarm, the lookout above the mansion who was monitoring the situation outside through observation magic also let out a heart-wrenching scream. Be careful. There's a black cigar coming down from the mountain. Chapter 652. At first, Su Xinxing only came to this world to take I Ching and the rest on vacation. Otherwise he would not have brought along Song Yu who had no combat power. But unexpectedly, in just half a year, almost 3 years for the people of this world had inexplicably reached the point of doomsday. I see. So that's what happened. After listening to I Ching's story on the River Moon, Su Xinxing nodded with his chin propped on his hand. Speaking of which, what about Finn and Elena? Didn't they take any measures to deal with this? In the early days of the Cataclysm, after realizing that we can't kill the spirit of chaos, Mr. Finn and Mrs. Elena began to prepare for the Sanctuary City plan. More than half of the existing sanctuary cities in the world are the result of that plan, including Clearwater City, which we are going to next. I Ching showed a look of admiration at first, but then his expression dimmed. But after the sanctuary city stabilized about 3 months ago, Mr. Finn and his wife set off to the place where the meteorite fell to investigate the cause of the cataclysm, and never came back. I Ching did not continue, but Su Xinxing and the rest could probably guess that Mr. Finn and his wife had met with misfortune. Finn and the rest were not wrong. In the current situation, doing nothing would only allow them to survive for a while. Only by solving the source of the cataclysm could they completely resolve the crisis. Unfortunately, the danger of this trip was obviously beyond their expectations. Su Xinxing could not help but fall silent. Even if Finn was only his temporary teammate in this world, he was still one of the few friends he had. Naturally, Su Xinxing was not happy about losing contact with him for no reason. And even though it was not a big deal, Finn was still the world's appointed hero, and Elena was a former demon king from the great demonic realm. Even if they escaped from this world, they could still be considered as heroes. Yet they had met with such inexplicable failure. This made Su Xinxing a little alarmed. It seemed that the omen of the apocalypse was more dangerous than he had expected. But it's good that you are here, Mr. Hero. I really can't handle it alone. Probably to ease the suddenly heavy atmosphere, I Ching made a face of great pressure. This wasn't all flattery but I Ching's true thoughts. When he first transmigrated to this world, although he was directly involved in the great war between humans and demons at that time, there were still many powerhouses on the human side, and the leadership of the human side was quite complete. As a hero, I Ching mostly acted according to the plan, and as a role model for the human side, he did not need to think too much and did not feel too much pressure. However, after the start of the cataclysm, both the humans and the demons who were capable of shouldering great responsibilities fell one after another. The elites also died in large numbers due to the indiscriminate attacks of the spirits of chaos at the beginning. As a result, I Ching, the eldest princess, and the other second-tier characters suddenly picked up the burden that would not have fallen on his shoulders. Especially after they lost contact with Finn and the others, the only person who could share their burden was also gone. The burden of more than 300,000 survivors made it hard for I Ching to breathe. Therefore I Ching was very happy to see Su Xinxing and the others. My surname is Su, just call me Old Su. Although your strength has reached the level of a hero, your mentality is still far from it. Su Xinxing calmly patted him on the shoulder. You still need to gain more experience. Then Mr. Su, what do you plan to do next? In I Ching's mind, Su Xinxing, who had saved this world more than 10 years ago, was indeed a senior figure, so he did not have any objections to his tone of teaching juniors. Instead he asked with concern. Let's go to Clearwater City first, let me understand more specific information, then I'll go to the place where the meteor fell. He was quite curious about the carrier that brought the era of destruction to this world. In addition, although Emily should be able to resist the aftermath of the era of destruction, it was better to let her stay here just in case. At the same time, she could also protect Song Yu and Jiang Yu, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We're about to reach the next stop, Clearwater City. Without waiting for I Ching to express any opinions or suggestions on Su Xinxing's travel arrangements, Jiang Yu began to report the stop. Su Xinxing poked his head out of the window and could indeed see the special city. In fact, Clearwater City was originally called Port of Clearwater, a city built on a large island, and at the same time, it was also the largest commercial port in the inland area through the Mistrai River to the sea. The island looked like a giant eggplant placed upside down in Clearwater Lake, and currently more than 80% of the area was occupied by buildings and slums. It looked like the eggplant was covered in mold. Only a small part of the eggplant was connected to the outside world through a man-made stone bridge. The lake surrounding Clearwater City was its natural barrier. Although the spirits of chaos were considered invincible to the people of this world, they had a set of specific rules of behavior. Otherwise, the humans would have long been doomed, and Su Xinxing would not have been able to save them. They would not simply cross natural barriers. That's right, although these incorporeal things could pass through walls, they would not pass through natural objects such as rocks. At the same time, although water was harmless to them, they would not deliberately enter the water. It was because of this that there were so many refugee cities in this world, and the one thing that these refugee cities had in common was that they were all built on special terrain with natural barriers. Su Xinxing poked his head out of the window and saw that the river moon was moving quickly and steadily on the water, and not far ahead of them was the floating city of Clearwater. Generally speaking, what would a refugee city do when they noticed those monsters approaching? Su Xinxing suddenly asked I Ching, who was in the car. Generally speaking, it's people like us who lure the spirits of chaos away. It's fine when there are only a few of them, but when there are too many of them, it's a disaster. Also, I heard that some refugee cities would sacrifice the lives of some civilians to lure them away because they don't have many strong people. Although I don't know the reason, but after the spirits of chaos kill the civilians, they will settle down in a very small area for a long time before they resume their activities. I Ching replied. The scholars of Her Royal Highness believe that the spirits of chaos are infecting humans to increase their own kind, but I guess that's the time they need to digest humans. I will never admit that those damn things are humans. I see. Then I'm afraid that the city thinks that we are part of the monsters. Su Xinxing also retracted his head back into the car and said calmly, Your two sisters are flying this way. Chapter 653. Although Mount Amos was located in the subtropical region of the continent and it was still summer, the foot of the mountain and the surrounding areas were quite warm. However, the temperature would drop drastically in a free-falling curve once one climbed more than 2,000 meters up the mountain. At an altitude of more than 5,000 meters, which was halfway up the mountain, the climate there would be as harsh as the cold winter in the north, with white snow and howling winds. Coupled with the extreme lack of resources, altitude sickness, thin air, and mountain disasters such as landslides and avalanches, a series of factors made it difficult for the people of this era, whose productivity was still stuck in the European Middle Ages, or maybe slightly higher, to climb to this rare peak. Although Lauren Claudian's cowardly nature is not worthy of hope, reaching the top of Mount Amos is still an undeniable great achievement. In a makeshift campsite halfway up the mountain, Madame Tsurigan sighed softly as she sipped on her freshly brewed coffee. Although she was already mentally prepared, only after experiencing it personally did she understand that compared to the real situation, the words on the books were too pale and powerless. Due to the air pressure, the boiling point of water at this altitude had lowered a lot. Therefore, although the coffee beans were still the same luxury goods that were exclusively used by the nobles in the past and were priced at the same level as gold, the taste was far inferior. However, there was no way she could complain about this in a place like this. The handsome man who was fiddling with the fire next to her immediately turned his head, and in response to her words, he smiled coquettishly. As Madame Tsurigan's confidant and male pet, her attitude towards him was almost related to his wealth and power. Therefore, even if he was quite dissatisfied with why Madame Tsurigan brought him to climb this mountain of death, he at least had to maintain his usual attentive appearance on the surface. Suddenly, a hoarse and rough male voice came from the door. Madam, we have received a communication from the bottom of the mountain. Come in and talk. Madame Tsurigan placed the coffee cup in her hand on the table and said. The person outside acknowledged and opened the wooden door of the room, and walked in amidst the howling cold wind. The other party was a strong man wearing a coat made of bear skin, or maybe some other animal's fur. His beeswax hair was covered with snowflakes, and it seemed like he had been outside for a while. There was a white goshawk perched on his raised right arm, and it seemed to be uneasy about the blazing stove in the room, as it constantly let out ear-piercing screeches. This was a raptor that was specially domesticated to maintain communication with the bottom of the mountain. Ordinary kites could not fly above 3,000 meters above sea level, let alone more than 5,000 meters. The male pet frowned and looked at the large snowflakes that were brought into the room by the strong man's action of opening the door and entering the room. According to the information sent back by our spies who secretly followed Lauren Claudian, that night seemed to have been attacked by unidentified bandits after leaving Burbum. Although his corpse has not been found, judging from the miserable state of his retainer knights and guards, he has been killed. The strong man had always looked down on the pretty boy who sold his body in exchange for favor, so he naturally did not care about the other party's expression. Instead, he directly reported to the person he was loyal to, Lady Tsurigan. The town of Burbum is an important transportation hub for the territories of several lords. For their own interests they have long since wiped out the bandits and whatnot. Lady Tsurigan smiled contemptuously. Only that damned green sparrow would do something like this without any scruples after finding an excuse. About this, the second information is related to Sir Jadebird. 2 days ago, His Majesty promoted Sir Jadebird's title to Duke because of his great merit. But strangely, he did not mention what the so-called great merit was. That's impossible. Lady Tsurigan was finally moved by the fact that her old rival was sitting on top of her head. However, her expression immediately calmed down, but her face was frighteningly gloomy. Forget it. If everything goes smoothly this time, let alone a mere duke. She then raised her head and looked at the strong man. Is there any other information? Not at the moment. That's good, you can go back and rest first. Miss Tsurigan pushed the burly man away and crossed her legs. She supported her face with one hand and fell into deep thought. In her eyes, the firewood that was brought up from the foot of the mountain was crackling in the fire. So, what exactly did you do to jump 3 ranks and become a duke in one go? Su Xinxing curiously asked the badly battered Duke Delicacy. Even if they suppressed their strength to the level of a normal person, it really wasn't difficult for Su Xinxing and the other two to subdue 100 people. The only difficulty was that there were still 2 burdens on their side. The knight was fine, but if Vil was killed in the chaotic battle, it would be awkward. It was just like in 3 Kingdoms, where they fought alone against the enemy and almost killed 1,000 people. However, the main general in the camp still lost. In short, because the scene was too bloody and tragic, let's skip the battle that might have been more interesting. In the end, all the enemies were naturally humiliated by the enemy, so I went to take off his clothes. That Duke Delicacy, who was still pretending to be Beep with all his might, was also captured alive, and was brought to Mount Amos as a trophy for Su Xinxing and the others. It's an aphrodisiac. Duke Delicacy struggled for a while, but in the end he still decided to admit defeat. His Majesty hasn't been very good in that aspect, and his relationship with the Queen has been a little tense. Coincidentally, I obtained a very effective aphrodisiac recipe from an alchemist. After I made the recipe and presented it to the king, my title was promoted. I suddenly feel worried for the future of this country. Lauren Claudian was speechless. How did you know that the aphrodisiac recipe is very effective? Su Xinxing looked at the problem from a crafty angle. Duke Delicacy immediately lay on the horse's back and pretended to be dead. Oh, we're finally out of the forest. At this moment, Veiler, who was walking at the front, called out. Then the scene in front of Su Xinxing suddenly brightened up. A strange light seemed to illuminate the entire sky, and a continuous mountain range stretched between the sky and the earth. Among them, there was a snow-white peak that was especially majestic, like a sharp blade that attracted everyone's attention. That was the end of their journey, Mount Amos. Chapter 654. The cold wind whistled and the powdery snow froze the air. We're finally here. Madame the crane-gazing orchid's usually radiant face now looked extremely pale. Due to the low temperature, white mist would escape from her nose and mouth with every breath she took, and the rapid breathing caused by the low pressure and strenuous exercise made the white mist seem endless. Even with the help of many servants, it was still too difficult to climb this mountain that was over 10,000 meters tall. Many who usually looked rather strong ended up becoming a burden to the team, and Madame the crane-gazing orchid's pet boy froze to death on the way. If not for her obsession since young and the road signs left by Lauren Claudian when he first climbed the mountain, Madame the crane-gazing orchid would never have reached the peak. However, putting aside the difficulties and obstacles in the process of climbing, the moment she reached the peak of Amos, she felt a great sense of loss when she saw that there was nothing but snow, blue sky, and white clouds. Madame, the burly man was also one of the few who reached the peak. He probably felt that Madame the crane-gazing orchid was wavering, so he said in a rough voice, "Look at the flat terrain here. It's most likely not formed naturally. There must be a mystery behind it." "Of course I know," Madame the crane-gazing orchid said through gritted teeth. After all, Lauren Claudian had already proved that there was nothing on the peak of the mountain. Besides, legend had it that the golden apple and the bloodline of Bourbon were needed to open the arcane realm where the deities lived. It would be more normal to say that the current empty state was normal. Madame the crane-gazing orchid stood up with the help of her squire and took out the golden apple from her leather pouch. If one were to look at the texture of the golden apple, it was exactly the same as the one in Lauren Claudian's hand. However, this genuine golden apple seemed to have an LED breathing light inside. The texture of the golden apple was constantly flashing with a pale blue radiance. To the people of the Middle Ages, this incredible phenomenon could be considered a miracle. It was also because of this that Madame the crane-gazing orchid and those who had seen the golden apple firmly believed in the legend. She took a deep breath and raised the golden apple high up, shouting, "In the name of the Bourbon bloodline, O legendary gate of the Garden of God, reveal your true appearance." The cold wind, mixed with snowflakes, blew past but nothing happened. Madame the crane-gazing orchid looked at the golden apple in her hand. It was still the same as before, shining with a mysterious and beautiful radiance. So she repeated what she did just now. But still nothing happened. "Open it. Show yourself." Madame the crane-gazing orchid panicked. She knelt in the snow and began to roar hysterically, "Why isn't it showing itself? What's wrong?" "Madame," the burly man could not bear to help her up, but she smashed the golden apple on his face. A stream of blood flowed down from his forehead and quickly froze. If God doesn't exist, then what should I do about my illness? I don't want to die. Madame the crane-gazing orchid howled pitifully. She was born in a noble family. Even though her father had passed down the golden apple and the true legend to her when she first came of age, many of her ancestors had tried to climb Mount Amos. However, none of them had succeeded in the past hundreds of years. It was already very difficult for them to keep the golden apple. Originally, Madame the crane-gazing orchid did not intend to look for the legendary garden of God. She was content with the status quo. Like most women in this era, she married a young noble at a young age. It was a pity that the other party soon died of illness, leaving the Countess Crane Hope Orchid alone. Well, that was not entirely true. She had a lot of lovers, money, and status. Naturally, she could indulge in sensual pleasures every day and continue to live a happy life, until a year ago. She was diagnosed by the best doctor in the empire with an incurable disease. She had less than 2 years left to live. After that, she went to many places to find various doctors to treat her illness. But in the end, they all said that they were powerless. Just when she was about to lose hope, the ancestral golden apple came into her field of vision. If there really was a God, such a small matter would definitely be easily solved. With this idea in mind, she prepared for more than half a year. She even did not hesitate to expose the fact that she had the golden apple to Baron Greenfinch. Baron Greenfinch tried every possible way to take it away. Finally, after Lauren Claudian successfully reached the top and summed up some of the tricks needed to reach the top, the time was finally ripe. For this moment she had sacrificed a lot, but she still failed. This feeling was probably like finding out that she had won 200 million, but when she went to redeem the prize she was told that her lottery ticket was from the previous issue. Suddenly, a sharp cry of a falcon pierced through the sky. Then a snow-white goshawk suddenly landed on the shoulder of the strong man in the snow. The strong man subconsciously took off the note tied to the talon. After taking a look, his expression changed greatly. Madame Duke Greenfinch and his suspected subordinates raided the outpost on the mountainside and took away the material. They may also be coming up. Madame Crane-gazing orchid stopped crying. She gritted her teeth and said with a ferocious expression, "If I can't get it, they won't get it either. Prepare to blast the jade, I'm going to give them a big gift." A wooden basin about the size of a small boat was moving up the Amos mountain at an alarming speed. Chapter 655. The snow on Mount Amos should be quite solid, so there shouldn't be any avalanches. Lauren Claudian was indeed an explorer. Even when he was screaming, he still had the energy to analyze the current situation. "Anyway, everyone, learn from me. Cover the back of your head with your hands and lie down on the ground. Remember to raise your buttocks. This way, even if you're buried, you'll still be able to preserve some air. You won't suffocate immediately." Immediately, Weiler and Duke Delicacy obeyed his order, and stuck out their butts like him. "Are we still going to pretend to be ordinary people in this situation?" Su Xinxing asked Charlotte as he helplessly looked at the 3 buttocks in the wooden basin. Even Jasmine kept a certain distance from them in disgust. "Well, we're almost there anyway. As long as we don't go overboard and show a little of our strength, it'll be fine." Charlotte pondered for a moment. When she saw that the avalanche was about to pounce on them, she finally made a concession. After all, even if Charlotte wanted to continue acting, she still had the demeanor of a goddess. She wouldn't want to struggle miserably in the wave of snow, right? "Then I won't hold back." Su Xinxing took a deep breath. Then, with an expression of relief as if his constipation had finally been cured, he raised his fist slightly. The next moment, Su Xinxing threw an ordinary punch at the roaring, snow-white wave that seemed to want to drown everything in the world. There were no cool light effects, nor was there any great destructive power. It was just like Moses who parted the sea, splitting the huge wave made of snow and ice into 2. "Hold on tight, we're going to rush over," Su Xinxing shouted, then pulled the rope on the wooden basin, and ran against the huge avalanche that was like a waterfall falling 3,000 feet straight down, towards the top of the mountain. What's going on? What's going on?" Lauren Claudian, who realized that he wasn't drowned in the wave of snow, raised his head and was stunned by the scene in front of him. There were raging waves of snow on both sides of the wooden basin. Even the rumbling sound of a huge amount of snow rolling over the mountain was deafening, but the road they were on was still calm. Compared to the terrifying scene on both sides, it was like a different world. "If I have to say it," Charlotte replied with a calm smile, "you can think of it as a miracle." "Amazing." Willer looked at the surrounding scene with his eyes shining. The little boy's mind was relatively simple. He was purely amazed by this wonder that ordinary people would never be able to see in their entire lives. Duke Delicacy stared at Su Xinxing's back with a complicated expression on his face. No one knew what he was thinking. With Su Xinxing as the vanguard, who also worked as a sled dog, the group quickly reached a place close to the mountain peak. Because of the avalanche just now, there was actually not much snow left here. It looked bare and a little ugly. There are traces of an explosion. It's the exploding jade. The avalanche just now was caused by the exploding jade. Lauren Claudian observed the traces left there and immediately made a judgment. It seems that Madame Crane really doesn't want anyone else to reach the top of the mountain. Unfortunately, we're already here. Su Xinxing grinned. Then he pulled the wooden basin and leaped to the top of the mountain with great force. His appearance was obviously beyond the expectations of Madame Crane and the others. The people on the top of the mountain who were lying on the ground due to the avalanche were startled. The golden apple. The moment the wooden basin landed, the sharp-eyed Willer had already pointed at the golden apple in Madame Crane's hand and shouted. Presumptuous. The strong man beside Madame Crane shouted angrily and pounced on the group. As a result, Su Xinxing lifted his foot and kicked the man off the top of the mountain. The man's head plunged into the snow that had become fluffy because of the avalanche, and only his lower body was exposed. Then he slid down along with the snow that had yet to stop. Those who could climb to the top of the mountain with Madame Crane were obviously loyal and not easy to deal with. After the strong man was instantly killed by Su Xinxing, they did not lose their fighting spirit. Instead, they pulled out their machetes and picked up their snow pickaxes, and carefully surrounded Su Xinxing. Madame Crane did not give up and continued to try to use the golden apple to open the legendary place where the gods lived. Just when Su Xinxing and Charlotte had faintly knocked down those people who had surrounded them, Duke Delicacy had left the wooden tub, and had stealthily come to Madame Orchid's side. Duke Delicacy had suddenly jumped up, and knocked Madame Orchid down with 2 punches, and snatched the golden apple from her hand. You. Madame Crane's nose was bleeding from the punch and she could only look at him with hatred. It's useless, the only ones who can use the golden apple are only the blood descendants of Alan Beerbohm, right? You don't have to wonder why I know about this. Duke Delicacy continued calmly. He glanced at Madame Crane disdainfully, and then looked at the golden apple in his hand, revealing an ecstatic expression. Because I am the descendant of the Supreme King. Crane, your ancestor was just a servant of my ancestor, and because he heard the legend from my ancestor, he stole the golden apple when my ancestor wasn't paying attention. He's just a despicable person. After saying that, he raised the golden apple high. As if responding to his actions, the shaking of the avalanche stopped. Faint traces of sunlight appeared in the sky, and fell on Duke Delicacy and the golden apple in his hand, making it sparkle. As for you, I'll repay you twice for making me suffer such humiliation. Perhaps he had gained great courage from this ray of light, but his gaze fell on Su Xinxing and the others, who had already cleaned up all the servants of Madame Gazing Orchid. Don't worry, for the sake of bringing me the golden apple, I'll at least spare your miserable lives. Su Xinxing didn't move and just looked at Charlotte with a look that said, Is this the good show you were talking about? The latter's expression was even more direct. It seemed that she had already regarded Duke Delicacy as a dead man. Jasmine was still calmly eating, as if she didn't care about what was going on outside, and was wholeheartedly eating jerky. In the name of the descendant of Beerbohm's bloodline, Garden of God, open the door to me and listen to my wishes. Duke Delicacy didn't delay any longer, and shouted loudly while holding the golden apple high. The wind and snow stopped at this moment. The sun's radiance pierced through the dark clouds, and turned into thousands of warm rays of light, spreading over the earth. However, apart from that, nothing else happened. Duke Delicacy was stunned for a long time and unwillingly tried again, but the result was still the same. So he silently put down the golden apple, and covered the back of his head with his hands, lying on the ground and sticking up his buttocks. At least don't hit my face. Chapter 656. Why on earth? Duke Delicacy, whose face was bruised and swollen, was tied up with Lady Tsurigin and thrown aside, muttered unwillingly, I am obviously the descendant of Beerbohm. Why is this happening? Unfortunately, except for Jasmine, who found a branch out of nowhere and squatted on the ground to poke the two of them from time to time, Su Xinxing and the others' attention had long been elsewhere. The fun you're talking about is the situation where two amusing people think that they are blessed by the heavens, and after doing a lot of things, they find that even the premise is wrong? Su Xinxing asked a certain god. Yes, isn't it very interesting? Charlotte nodded. Observing the amusing behavior of human beings is one of the few pleasures I have left as the pinnacle of the gods. What a bad taste. Su Xinxing's face was full of disagreement. It feels like those evil gods in the myths who take pleasure in people. That's not the case. I didn't add fuel to the flames of those two people's behavior. I was just observing in secret. Everything was their own choice. Charlotte turned a blind eye to Su Xinxing's helplessness and turned to look at Willer, who was somewhat at a loss. Compared to this, it's almost time to get to the point. For this little boy, what happened in the past 2 days was completely beyond his understanding. Not to mention Countess Zurigan and Duke Delicacy, even Lauren Claudian, who was a knight, was not someone a poor orphan like him could get close to in the past. After all, the difference in status between the two was too great. In addition, in this non-fantasy world without supernatural powers, the solidification of the social classes cast by the times was almost impossible to break. If it weren't for the sudden appearance of Su Xinxing and the others, perhaps this child would have been like this for the rest of his life. What? Seeing that Su Xinxing and Charlotte's eyes were on him, Willer could not help but feel a little uneasy. I'm afraid they want you to open the door. At this time, Lauren Claudian seemed quite calm. If you think about it carefully, it's very strange that they would bring you along. After all, I'm the only explorer who has reached the top of Amos, and Duke Delicacy is also a duke. In this way, I'm afraid the only reason they would bring you along is that you meet the necessary conditions to open the legendary Garden of the Gods. Alright, although the knight's conjecture was full of loopholes due to the disparity in the amount of information, Charlotte only brought him and Duke Delicacy because she thought it was fun. The final conclusion was unexpectedly correct. Willer, you might find it strange, but in fact, I'm afraid you're the person with the purest Beerbone bloodline in this world. Charlotte placed the golden apple on the snow in front of the boy and slowly explained to him. In fact, when she said that, the boy did not find it difficult to understand. His father's generation was an ancient great sage, but the ancestors on his mother's side were very secretive and never spoke much about it. Combined with the small wooden box that hid Alan Beerbohm's will and belongings that were passed down from generation to generation, it was not surprising that he was really the descendant of the Supreme King. But because of that, the boy suddenly felt a sense of resistance. Could it be that the person who had been so kind to him along the way was just borrowing his power to enter the legendary residence of the gods? The golden apple isn't the key to the door, it's the door itself. The real key is something else. Charlotte continued. Something else. Could it be? Willer remembered the sparrow-shaped candle in the box that had been passed down from generation to generation in his family. At the same time, the feeling that he was being schemed against became even stronger. Don't worry. It's not nice to say it, but for certain reasons, we could open the Garden of Golden Apples with the Walking Cuckoo candle even if we don't have Beerbohm's bloodline. The reason I'm letting you do it is to fulfill the promise we made centuries ago, and let two souls rest in peace. Charlotte persuaded softly, seemingly noticing Willer's resistance. Indeed, if they only wanted to open the hidden space on Mount Amos, whether it was Su Xinxing or Charlotte, as long as they obtained the goddess device, the difficulty would be greatly reduced. But Charlotte didn't do it in the end. As a deity, her power was considerably suppressed in this world, but she still had considerable mysterious abilities such as being able to sense and faintly sense the intense longing humans placed on objects. It was precisely because she sensed the longing of the founder of the Beerbohm dynasty and a faint presence that she decided to have Willer, a descendant of Beerbohm, complete the ritual. Perhaps it was difficult for ordinary words to move people who were stubborn, but Charlotte was different. Even though she was not in her complete form when she was serious, her words were the words of God and possessed magical power. For a mortal like Willer, it was no different from a so-called severe warning. I know. Hence, the little youth nodded and took out the candle from his backpack, but was left dumbfounded amidst the howling cold winds. But how do we light a fire in this place? Not to mention the fact that there was no suitable kindling. Even if there was, the extremely low temperature and the howling cold wind would extinguish the fire in a few seconds. Is there really a need to light a fire? Charlotte declined to comment and continued to ask in a gentle voice. Alan Beerbohm's last wish was? An idea flashed through Willer's mind. He stuffed the candle into his pocket and began digging on the ground with his hands that were covered in leather gloves. Although the accumulated snow on the peak of the mountain was still snow, the long years of exposure to wind and rain had made it as solid as ice. Even when it was blasted by Madame Orchid the Crane's jade blast just now, there were only a few cracks. One could imagine how difficult it was to dig on such a thing with bare hands. Not only that, but this was the peak of the mountain that was more than 10,000 meters above sea level. The thin air made people short of breath, and even the most insignificant movements would cause fatigue that was several times more than usual. Let me help. Lauren Claudian was just about to give Willer a little help, but was stopped by Su Xinxing, who was instructed by Charlotte. After all, this isn't something that others can interfere with. Hundreds of years ago, Alan Beerbohm failed to fulfill his promise with Zhou Wan. His regret and longing before his death traversed through time and space, entrusting it to his descendant. It was an obsession that belonged to him alone. His hands were clearly numb, his breathing was clearly labored, and his body temperature was clearly being taken away by the cold wind. However, Willer did not stop. He knelt on the ground and dug at the ground that was covered by 10,000 years of ice and snow. In the end, he really dug out a small pit that was not much bigger than a palm. But at this moment, Willer finally reached his limit. His entire body was like a robot with a power cut, and he collapsed in the snow. I can't fall asleep. Open your eyes. If you fall asleep in this place, you definitely won't wake up. Lauren Claudian shouted anxiously at the boy. He wanted to help the boy up, but he was blocked by Su Xinxing and the others. In fact, Su Xinxing was also sweating for the boy in his heart. He had seen many strong-willed warriors, but those were, after all, trained adults. To be able to train themselves meant that they had experienced a long period of arduous training, and it was not surprising that they had a strong will. But Willer was just an ordinary child who had no special experiences other than these 2 days. To be honest, it was not strange for him to give up here. After all, there were only a few people who could grit their teeth and break through their limits. Just as Willer did not move for a long time, and even Charlotte was about to give up, the boy suddenly moved. He did not seem to have the strength to support his body again. He just slowly and shakily put the walking cuckoo's candle into the pit, and then weakly pushed the pile of ice that he had dug out back into the pit. But it was enough. The golden apple seemed to have turned on the vibration mode, and it shook violently. The next moment, a blue beam of light spewed out of the golden apple and shot straight into the sky. Then, white light burst out again and enveloped the entire top of Mount Immerse. At this moment, in the eyes of the people at the foot of the mountain and in the vicinity, Mount Immerse had turned into a huge world tree. The lonely peak that was originally towering into the clouds had now become a straight tree trunk. The huge white light that expanded and finally shone in the sky was like the crown of the tree. Countless golden light spots were like golden fruits flickering in it. This scene was so shocking that one could imagine that even after 100 or 1,000 years, this scene would still be passed down in the form of a legend in this area. And at this moment, in the white light, except for Charlotte, Su Xinxing, and Jasmine, everyone else had disappeared. They were not dead, but they were isolated to another space. No, in a sense, it should be Su Xinxing and the others who were isolated to another space. Because the place where they were now was undoubtedly the legendary Divine Kingdom, the Golden Apple Orchard. Thank you, sister. In this white light that was full of a sense of holiness, a young girl slowly emerged. She sat on the trunk of an apple tree and looked at Su Xinxing and the others with a smile. If Alan Beerbohm was still alive, he would probably be able to find that this young girl was exactly the same as the woman who appeared in the Cuckoo, except for the different hair color, which was golden. Thanks to all of you, the karma between my soul and this world has finally ended. The so-called karma, in the words of immortal cultivation, was that there was still karma to be settled, and there was no way to leave this place in one piece. Only by ending the karma could one be free of worries. Compared to that, you actually didn't crash all over the world? Su Xinxing stared at her in surprise. And here I thought that was the only place to find your divine core. He's right. You're in such a weird state, Moridia. Charlotte sighed, though it was clear that she was in a good mood. The entire world is filled with your scent, and thanks to that interference, I can't observe the essence of all things more precisely. Or rather, why is the entire world filled with your scent even though you're clearly not scattered all over the world? This matter has to start from a long time ago. That's right, from when I transmigrated to this world. Moridia had no intention of keeping Joshua in suspense, and very easily explained the reason. Although you might not have noticed it, Mr. Oravaya, this world is a superior world that has already developed a world consciousness. I really didn't feel that. Su Xinxing scratched his face. Since he did not use any world-class combat ability, there was no feedback from the world itself. Still, it was rare for a pure technological world to develop a consciousness. Then, when I transmigrated to this world, the world consciousness of this world was planning to wipe out all life in this world. Wow. It wasn't just Su Xinxing, Even Charlotte was shocked. Generally speaking, the world consciousness would not pay attention to the birth and development of life. After all, life itself was a part of the world. Although there would occasionally be a world that specifically targeted a certain life or its population, causing it to go extinct, that was because the other party's development had begun to cause harm to the world itself. A normal world that killed all life in one go did not exist. Has it been contaminated by the Great Devil Realm? Su Xinxing thought about it. This was probably the only possibility for a similar situation. Only when the world consciousness had been completely contaminated by the madness of the Great Devil Realm would it come up with the idea of eliminating all life. That's not the case. The world consciousness of this world is quite healthy. Moridia shook her head and revealed the answer. It's just, afraid. Afraid? Charlotte tilted her head in confusion. I don't know much about the specific situation, but from the information I obtained after connecting to the world consciousness with the goddess device, Juro, this world seems to think that in the near future, all worlds will be attacked and destroyed by the apocalypse. The reason why it wants to eliminate all life is because when there are no observers in this world, the existence of the world itself will become ambiguous, between reality and illusion. Only by doing so will there be a chance to avoid the attack of the apocalypse and allow the world itself to continue to exist. Moridia informed Su Xinxing and the others of the information she had obtained. Although it did not explain what the apocalypse was, Su Xinxing immediately thought of the era of destruction. Then could it be? Charlotte seemed to have thought of something and looked at Moridia with some surprise. Yes, I took over Juro's authority and constantly corrected the laws of this world that were distorted by the world consciousness, so that life can avoid the end of destruction, Moridia replied with a bitter smile. Therefore, as long as there was life in the vicinity of a planet, they would always be able to detect Meridia's presence. Because she had always been facing the malice of the entire universe alone, protecting all the creatures in this world. Although it was not important to the gods, her current body had reached its limit. Even standing up and walking had become an extravagant hope. The same is true for the planet under your feet. It should have been engulfed and burned by the star next to it nearly 1,000 years ago, but by constantly modifying the distance between the two, I have allowed this planet to linger on at death's door. Moridia looked a little dispirited. If it was my sister, there would definitely be a better way. But this is already the limit of what I can do. Charlotte was silent. However, as the only god of many worlds, her status had actually surpassed the creation of the world. If she was independent from the world, she could drag her own world over to help and communicate with the world's consciousness. She might really be able to tame the other party. But it was too late to say anything now. Originally, it was still fine with the help of the goddess device, Walking Cuckoo. But a few hundred years ago, because of an accident, Walking Cuckoo was left in the human world. Because she had the ability to instantly reset the laws I modified, it was too dangerous. So I had no choice but to separate a strand of my divine soul to search for her. But under a lucky coincidence, my divine soul attached itself to Walking Cuckoo. Fortunately, although I couldn't retrieve Walking Cuckoo in time, I was able to lock down Walking Cuckoo's authority to prevent it from being used by others. Then what do you plan to do now? Charlotte asked. I don't know, Moridia replied straightforwardly. Hey. Charlotte staggered and almost fell. But shouldn't we leave the problem to our captain at this time? Meridia's gaze swept past Jasmine, her eyebrows slightly furrowed, and then shifted to Su Xinxing. Didn't our team disband a long time ago? Su Xinxing scratched his head. It doesn't matter, in my sisters and my heart, Mr. Olivia, you will always be our captain, the young girl replied with a smile. Then this captain's job is really troublesome, Su Xinxing sighed. Let's remove Zhu Luo's law modification. I also need to take a look at the situation. Do we really have to remove it? If we remove it, who knows, the next moment this planet will directly collide with a star. Other life forms in other places will also die out in various ways. Speaking of this, Meridia's expression became serious. Then we'll only remove the one on this planet, Su Xinxing said noncommittally. His gaze darkened, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. After all, if the other party doesn't make a move, I won't be able to catch its foxtail, right? Since it's your wish, then we'll do as you wish. Moridia made her decision almost without any hesitation. Thus, in the next moment, the inhabitants of this planet suddenly discovered that the temperature seemed to have risen by quite a bit, and the star in the sky that was translated as the sun had also become much larger. Jasmine, protect this planet. What? Jasmine obediently raised her hands high, and suddenly, an invisible barrier appeared on the periphery of this world. Almost at the same time, the distortion of the worlds will arrived. In just an instant, this planet was sent to the front of the star, and was captured by the star's gravity, slowly being pulled towards its surface, which was over 6,000 degrees Celsius. But just this instant was enough. Su Xinxing had already found the link to the world's will among the countless karmic ties. Unknowingly, the sacred sword of the Enrich had already appeared in Su Xinxing's hands. As a world, what the hell are you afraid of? He swung the sword. This was not a sword of destruction, but a sword that simply cut open the surface of the world, exposing the hidden world's will. In the next moment, the entire world seemed to have stopped. Fear, panic, fear, all sorts of emotions flowed into his heart through that sword strike. This was probably the world's will's fear of the apocalypse, or the era of destruction. Counter soldiers with arms, water with earth. It's not easy to gain self-awareness, so it's normal to fear destruction, but if I mess up my own world for an illusory apocalypse, that's too stupid. Su Xinxing raised Overlord high and shouted at the world rift that he had cut open. Don't worry, I'll protect you. Isn't it just the era of destruction? Just wait and see how I deal with it. Then he muttered softly, that's right, it has to be dealt with eventually. The next moment, as if time had been reversed, the planet beneath their feet had returned to its original orbit. Chapter 657. World data feedback received, over. Beginning in-depth analysis, over. Beginning standard data comparison, over. No abnormal data found. Along with Meridia's faint voice, the golden apples in the orchard began to flicker with a mysterious blue light. After a moment, the light faded and Meridia, who had returned to normal, smiled bitterly and shook her head. After being threatened by Mr. Oravaya, this world really returned to its normal state. What is this, bullying the weak and fearing the strong? In order to prevent this world from destroying all living beings, just maintaining the operation of the goddess device, Zhu Luo, had almost caused her to lose all ability to move. For this reason, she had no choice but to seal herself and Zhu Luo's original body in a different dimension, to prevent the situation of their corpses being picked up by others. In the end, after Su Xinxing appeared, with just a wave of his sword and a few words, he solved the problem that she had not been able to solve for hundreds of years. Bullying the weak and fearing the strong is the instinct of all living beings. Even if it's a world, it can't avoid such a situation after gaining consciousness, Su Xinxing casually replied. Following one's heart and seeking benefits and avoiding harm are essentially the same thing. Compared to this, Meridia, can you still move now? Charlotte asked her silly sister. I'm sorry, sister, I might need a little more time. Meridia shook her head slightly. Using the units that Mr. Oravaya is used to, I'll need about 5 years. Su Xinxing was speechless. So the concept of time of the long-lived species was a little problematic. That's really regrettable. Originally, I wanted to ask you to help reseal Jasmine. Su Xinxing scratched his head. Looking at the current situation, he didn't know if Jasmine's seal could last for another 5 years. But even if it couldn't last for 5 years, at least 2 or 3 years shouldn't be a problem. Compared to this, the upcoming era of destruction was obviously a little more important. In any case, regardless of whether it was Charlotte or Meridia, they were both comrades that Su Xinxing could entrust his back to. So, he straightforwardly told them about the situation regarding the era of destruction. There's actually such a thing? I thought that everything would be fine after dealing with the Great Devil Realm, but I'm really too naive. After listening, Charlotte couldn't help but frown. Actually, if you think about it carefully, there's something else that's very strange. Meridia said aloud. Because this world sensed that the apocalypse was coming, it wanted to strangle every living thing in its world to avoid the apocalypse. In other words, the apocalypse it was referring to was a calamity that could destroy the world itself, right? Aside from the Great Devil Realm, there wasn't anything else that could completely destroy a world, which is why I didn't realize what this apocalypse represented. What if it knew that Shiwei would come? Charlotte suddenly interjected. If I remember correctly, Shiwei had once wiped out an entire world, didn't he? Meridia, although she really wanted to retort when she thought about it carefully, an angry Su Xinxing equals the end of the world didn't seem wrong. Is it that fun to mock me? Su Xinxing also pulled a long face and complained in dissatisfaction. Anyway, the matter here is settled. Let's retreat. Charlotte ignored Su Xinxing's ridicule with a perfect smile, and prepared to leave with Meridia. Are we going back? When Jasmine, who was originally expressionlessly chewing on her jerky, heard this, although her face basically didn't change, It gave people the illusion that she was glowing. If this was a manga, the background should be filled with pink bubbles and little flowers. Then she threw the jerky aside and said to Su Xinxing, "Landlord, I want to eat some pancakes. Look at this child, she's already been taught by old Su, and the food she eats is so ordinary. No problem." Su Xinxing, who was in a good mood because he could finally go home, gave her a thumbs up. "No problem." "About 50, Jasmine cheered. So old Su began to pretend to be deaf. "Speaking of which, are you guys planning to go straight back to the kingdom of God?" he asked Charlotte, who was snickering at the side. "Didn't you say before that you don't want me to live a mediocre life like I am now?" "Well, this trip has made me understand. Even if you want to live a mediocre life, I'm afraid it won't be that easy. I'm afraid that all kinds of troublesome things will find you one after another," Charlotte said with a smile. "You're really insightful." Speaking of this, Su Xinxing felt a wave of helplessness. He always felt as if he had been experiencing all kinds of messy things. That's for sure. If a person has no sense of responsibility and can really turn a blind eye to all the tragedies in front of him, then he can naturally live a mediocre life. But you're different. Even if you look forward to the happiness of ordinary people, when you see some injustice, you still can't help but intervene out of a sense of justice or other reasons, right? Charlotte's smile was as cunning as a little fox's. "After all, you were once the savior of the world. Meddling in other people's business is the quality that a savior should have. Is this a compliment or an insult?" Su Xinxing did not know whether to laugh or cry. "It's a compliment," Charlotte replied firmly. "In short, I will use the goddess device to monitor the reactions of the nearby worlds. Once I find any clues about the era of destruction, I will leave to contact you." Su Xinxing shrugged. "Then I really have to thank you." "That's it then." The time in this world is slightly warped, so although we've been here for a while, not even a day has passed on your Earth. It doesn't matter if we go back now. After saying this, Charlotte carried Moridia on her back and prepared to leave. At this time, Moridia suddenly said, "Sister, wait a moment. I still have something to say to Mr. Alvia." Charlotte could not help but stop. "What is it?" Su Xinxing asked curiously. "Actually, before I came to this world, I had found some scattered clues in other worlds." Moridia took a deep breath. "After piecing together those clues, I found that Jiang Bor had left the star field and was looking for someone in the infinite universe. He's looking for me, right?" Su Xinxing recalled what he had seen and heard in the world fragment. After all, Jiang Bor's divine spear of 7 was still in his hands. "He probably has something to say to me. Unfortunately, I didn't see where he was until the end." "No, that should be something that Jiang Bor did after he found someone. Before looking for you, he had already started looking for someone else." Moridia refuted Su Xinxing's guess. For this, Jiang Bor did not hesitate to break the promise he had made and gave up looking after the last orphan of the three-headed dragon in the star field. "Is that so?" Su Xinxing could not help but ponder. After finding someone, he started looking for him. Who was that someone? If I'm not wrong, Meridia's breathing was a little hurried. The person Jiang Bor was looking for in the beginning could be Tonia. Su Xinxing was stunned. Chapter 658. Be careful? Su Xinxing came back to his senses and found Song Yu looking at him worriedly. "What happened? Why have you been in a daze ever since you came back?" the girl asked with concern. It had been 3 days since Su Xinxing found Moridia and returned to Earth. In these 3 days, no matter what Su Xinxing did, he would often be distracted, so it was normal for Song Yu to be worried. "It's nothing, don't worry." Su Xinxing smiled and brushed it off. But in his mind, Meridia's words before she left kept coming back to him. Tonia is still alive. No, perhaps I should say she has been resurrected. That day, Moridia told Su Xinxing solemnly. "Impossible, Tonia's level is too high. Even if we use some things in the world that have the ability to resurrect, there's no way to bring her back to life." Su Xinxing said with a conflicted expression of hope, but also fear of hearing false news, so he did not dare to believe it. "That's right. Perhaps in a normal world, whether it's resurrection spells, resurrection elixirs, or things like the soul returning incense, in theory there's no way to resurrect Tonia. After all, she's also Yuan Yang's child. If she hadn't passed away so early, she would definitely have been a part of the counterattack against the Great Devil Realm." Moridia nodded. "But the prerequisite for this theory is that it's a normal caster, in a normal world. What if the person who did this was also a member of the Brave Squad?" "What did you say? Who could it be?" Su Xinxing was startled. Putting aside the 7-member squad that counterattacked the Great Devil Realm, the Brave Squad had more than 20 members before that. Although they couldn't do this in the past, it didn't mean that they couldn't do it now. After all, those people were the elites of the elites in the world. To be honest, even Su Xinxing wasn't sure how much they had grown in the past few years. Although it's only my speculation based on the clues in Jiang Bor's notes. Jiang Bor seems to think that the person who did this is Anton Herbart. Moridio waited for Su Xinxing to calm down a bit before answering. Anton. If it's that guy. There were 7 members of the Brave Squad that had gathered from more than 9,000 worlds and successfully counterattacked the Great Devil Realm. The unparalleled brave Su Xinxing, the Silver Dragon of Origins Yong Eshaha, the twin goddesses Charlotte and Moridia, and the beloved of the world Jiang Bor Khan Pentroud. Anton Herbart was one of the remaining 2 members. He was the most powerful bestowment warlock in history, the brains of the Brave Squad, and a powerful man who could create laws of nature and repair the world with only auxiliary magic spells. It must be noted that before he traveled through space and time, Su Xinxing wasn't powerful enough to defeat everything. He had been racking his brains because of the internal strife in the human allied army. After Princess Auravia joined the Brave Squad, Su Xinxing's burden in this aspect was much lighter. After Anton Herbart joined the Brave Squad, old Su didn't use his brain anymore. He let Anton do all the planning while old Su emptied his mind. Finally, he broke through the arcane demon realm. Su Xinxing didn't know if it was a special case or not, but in his experience, all the wise people he met had a hard time, and Anton was no exception. The first half of the guy's life was basically spent alone in the study of magic. When he was young, he was too precocious and was abandoned as a bad omen. When he grew up, he took the initiative to avoid contact with other people. Be it adults or children, they were all stupid to him. His sense of superiority and intelligence made him too lazy to interact with ordinary people. When he was about 20 years old, he had seen through all the mysteries of magic in that era and began to explore the unknown. After years of maintaining absolute rationality, he began to lose his human emotions. In fact, when he explained his mission later, he would basically start with, "I'm sorry, I don't understand the human heart, so the following plan is all based on calculation." When Su Xinxing finally persuaded this guy, in fact it was more like this guy wanted to go to other worlds to obtain new knowledge, so he hitched a ride with Su Xinxing to join the Brave Squad and break through more than 9,000 grids. Anton met his love. She isn't a human but the world consciousness of a grid world. No matter how the two of them got along, Anton did find his feelings as a human because of the consciousness of that world. After that, Anton even came to Su Xinxing alone, hoping that Su Xinxing could let him leave the Brave Squad and settle him in that world. Of course, Su Xinxing agreed. Unfortunately, that world was one of the earliest grids that were captured by the Great Devil Realm, and it had turned into the shape of the Great Devil Realm. Even though Su Xinxing and his companions defeated the Demon King's army inside the world still collapsed because the Great Devil Realm extracted too much of its original power. That was why Anton's strategy was more radical when he attacked the Archdevil Realm. As a result, the brave team was almost wiped out. After Su Xinxing broke through the Great Devil Realm, this guy soon left the team and disappeared. Anton seems to have been looking for a way to resurrect that world. And he seemed to have found something. Moridio waited for Su Xinxing to come back to his senses before continuing. Antonia was his test subject. However, after Anton resurrected Dongnia, he didn't plan to take care of her. Instead, he spread the news through some channels. He seems to be looking for you. You know that Jiang Bor respects you the most. After knowing this, he naturally gave up on his promise and followed the clues Anton left behind to find Dongnia. I understand. Su Xinxing sighed. Anyway, thank you. The memory ended. To be honest, under normal circumstances, Su Xinxing wouldn't be so worried. The problem was that Jiang Bor, who was once a member of the hero team and was considered one of the strongest fighters in the normal world even after leaving the Lance of Seven, was dead. The cause of his death was unknown. In this way the situation became a little confusing. Did Dongnia resurrect? If she really resurrected, did Jiang Bor find her? And what was her situation now? It would be a lie to say that he wasn't worried. Otherwise, with old Su's temperament, he wouldn't have been so distracted in the past 2 days. Speaking of which, where's Xingyan? Why haven't I seen her in the past 2 days? Song Yu probably wanted Su Xinxing to relax a little, so she took the initiative to talk about an unrelated topic. I asked her to go to Kunlun and find Bai Zhe to calculate something for me. Su Xinxing stared blankly at the sofa where Jasmine was playing with the dog maiden. It's not like I can't go alone, but I have a feeling that if I go with Jasmine that Lu Wu will go crazy. Is that so? Song Yu, who had never been to Kunlun, was confused. Chapter 659. At this time, a knock suddenly came from the front door of Ying's apartment. Is Xingyan back? Su Xinxing's eyes lit up as he gestured for Jasmine to open the door. But I refuse. The little rascal rejected old Su's call without hesitation. She then continued to rub the puppy's stomach. Puppy, ha, it's so ticklish, as she played around with her. Is this little rascal getting more and more lazy? Who did she learn from? This made Su Xinxing, who was lying on the table, sigh helplessly. He did not notice the complicated look in Song Yu's eyes. Let me open the door. Song Yu gave a bitter smile as she stood up and walked towards the front door. When she opened the door, she realized it wasn't Qin Xingyan. Instead, it was a black-haired lowly wearing a large cap. Huh. Song Yu, who had never seen her before, revealed a confused expression. Who are you looking for? I'm looking for Mr. Xinxing. Just as the lowly was about to reply, she revealed a cute smile towards the person behind Song Yu. This made Song Yu turn his head subconsciously, only to find that Su Xinxing had also come to the entrance, and even Jasmine had followed him. Hey Jiangyun, long time no see. Su Xinxing even greeted the other party. Do you guys know each other? Song Yu asked curiously as she blinked her large eyes. It's about the same time I've known you. Su Xinxing thought for a moment before replying. Long time no see. Mr. Xinxing. Jasmine, oh, it's Jiang Yu. Jasmine had already hugged him. The two lowly soft cheeks were pressed together, looking like cotton candy that had been squeezed together. It was exceptionally soft and cute. Oh no, an unexpectedly strong enemy. Song Yu noticed that Su Xinxing's face revealed a rare smile that was closer to that of a pervert than a kind smile. She was immediately shocked. Considering Su Xinxing's suspected lolicon fetish, the threat level of Jiang Yu in her heart suddenly skyrocketed, even above Qin Xingyan. What's the matter this time? If it was someone like Xiao Jingyi or Su Feng who came to find him when Su Xinxing was upset, he would most likely directly tell them to scram. However, the person who came was Jiang Yu, so old Su naturally became amiable. It wasn't because he was a lolicon, but it was because many people couldn't help but become gentle when talking to cute pets. It was almost the same principle. I don't have anything special to do, but didn't Mr. Xinxing and the boy named Yi Qing agree to pick them up in a month? Jiang Yu said in a gentle voice as usual. Today, a depressed woman came to the museum. It seems that her friend dragged her here to change her mood. Although I didn't mean to eavesdrop, according to their conversation, that woman should be Yi Qing's mother. Yi Qing hasn't come home yet and she's very worried, so I came to ask. It took Su Xinxing half a minute to remember who Yi Qing was, and he showed an awkward expression. About half a year ago, Su Xinxing, who was turned into a cat by Jasmine, was accidentally summoned to a grid world he had once saved with 3 Earth boys and girls. For various reasons, they were involved in the war between the humans and the demons in that world. Although Su Xinxing and Jasmine succeeded in stopping the war between the humans and the demons by scaring them, the situation was still not optimistic, so Yi Qing and the others volunteered to stay in that world and help the indigenous heroes of that world deepen the relationship between the two races. Su Xinxing also made an appointment with them to bring them back in a month, Earth time, but because a lot of things happened in the process of returning to Earth, even after returning to Earth, all kinds of messy situations happened one after another, making Su Xinxing a little tired of running for his life. He accidentally forgot about the 3 little guys. After hiding the part about the cats, Su Xinxing told Song Yu the whole thing. So that's how it is. Something like this actually happened. Song Yu seemed to be overflowing with interest. She looked at Jiang Yu, who was still in Jasmine's embrace. Oh. Miss Jasmine, I feel like I can't breathe, Jiang Yu protested weakly. Of course, Jasmine ignored it. Well, so you stay in Sakura's apartment first. Jasmine and I will go to that world to bring them back. Su Xinxing asked Jasmine to find the magic coordinates that were left there. At the same time, he confirmed the situation with Jiang Yu, and planned to go to the museum again to get the river moon out. Song Yu wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, she smiled gently and said, "Okay, be careful on the way." Su Xinxing looked at her, hesitated for a moment, and then sent an invitation to the girl. How about you come with us? That world is average but the scenery is not bad. Ah, Song Yu looked at Su Xinxing in surprise. This should be the first time the latter invited her to go somewhere with him. In the past, Song Yu was afraid that she would be a hindrance to Su Xinxing, so she never took the initiative to go with him to those places. Su Xinxing was also afraid that Song Yu would be hurt, so he never took the initiative to invite Song Yu. However, this world should not be too dangerous. After all, whether it was the human side or the demon side, their leaders were all his acquaintances. Then tears appeared in the corner of the girl's eyes and she answered excitedly. I'm willing. Don't be so excited. Send a message to Xingyan and the others first in case they can't contact us and cause trouble. Su Xinxing instructed. Okay. Song Yu naturally did as she was told. After replacing the Jiangyue in the museum with a 4K projection kindly provided by Jasmine, the group boarded the Jiangyue and sailed into the Ether Sea again, heading towards the grid world. Although that was what he said, in reality, after leaving the world barrier of the world where Earth was located, Old Su sent the Jiangyue into the world where I Ching and the others were located according to the beacon left by Jasmine. The weather in this world doesn't seem too good today. However, as soon as they entered that world, the rolling dark clouds and occasional flashes of lightning shocked Song Yu. In reality, if Su Xinxing hadn't protected the Jiangyue in time, they would probably have been struck by lightning. There's something wrong with the thunder clouds. Old Su frowned. Could it be that a trip that was purely for sightseeing and picking up people would also encounter trouble? Jiangyue, prepare to land. What's wrong? Song Yu was a little uneasy. After all, compared to the others in Sakura Apartments, she had never seen such a scene. Nothing. Don't worry, no matter what happens, Su Xinxing smiled at her. I'll bring you back safely. Chapter 660. On the desolate land, the northern wind blew, stirring up a cloud of gray dust. The sky was covered by strange black clouds. It was not the kind of clouds formed by natural weather. Instead, it was like the internal organs of a living creature, constantly squirming and spreading malice to the area it covered. The malice would condense into a tangible black dust, like snowflakes falling from the clouds. But unlike real snowflakes, this black dust was more poisonous than strong acids. Without the protection of divine power, ordinary people walking under this black dust would be quickly infected, and eventually turn into a pile of dirt. The mutation began a year ago. At that time, I Ching was still busy because of the friction between the humans and the demons, and the integration of the two races was not smooth. Therefore, although the Savior did not come to pick him up as promised, he did not care too much. Until one day, a meteor that could be seen even in the daytime streaked across the sky and landed on the emerald green plains. For a moment, the residents of this world were panic-stricken, thinking that the invader that almost defeated the two armies of the humans and demons 2 years ago had finally begun to invade this world. Only I Ching and a few people who knew the inside story did not think much of it, and felt that it was just a coincidence. After all, in their understanding, Su Xinxing, who had saved the world and even did not hesitate to take the blame for the reconciliation between the humans and demons, would not do such a thing. Both sides sent out scouts to explore the mysteries of the falling meteor. In the end, the content was very simple. The thing that fell from the sky was naturally not a terrifying demon king, but a huge, sparkling and translucent crystal. In the end, the truth told them that things were not so simple. A few days after the meteor fell, with the green plains as the center, the whole world began to be infected by the evil power, and everything seemed to change. The vegetation gradually withered, and the animals became crazy, full of the desire to attack. Even the humans, demons, were not spared from this disaster, and were dominated by the unknown evil power. If it was only like this, it would be fine. At most it would become a different world version of Resident Evil. For people like I Ching who came from Earth and had a large number of zombie films, it was not particularly troublesome. The real reason why they felt helpless was not that humans had become walking corpses that could attack others, but that they had become like children's scribbles without a definite outline, like a combination of countless bad lines, and monsters that had even lost their flesh and human form. Humans had no way to defeat the enemy. Whether it was swords, arrows, fire, ice, lightning, or even a full blow imbued with the power of the demon king or the power of the hero, they could not destroy these things, and could only simply beat the monster until it lost its external outline. This state, which could recover in a day at most, was not even a heavy injury to these monsters. This almost invincible power also caused some strange voices among the human survivors. Some survivors seemed to think that humans, demons, had become like this not because they were dead, but because they had evolved to a whole new stage, and this was a right that all humans should enjoy, and they should not be shunned like snakes or scorpions. These survivors formed a cult and began to fight against the temporary government agencies that humans and demons had set up to deal with the current situation. They set up obstacles everywhere. Fortunately, these people left the refuge by themselves and became monsters after being infected by external forces. According to the current situation, there was no difference between the monsters that they had become and the previous ones. As time passed, the situation of the temporary coalition government of humans and demons became worse and worse. Under Xia Shuiyao's leadership, the newly established church was almost unable to suppress the evil forces in the outside world. The few survivors who had taken refuge in the city were running out of supplies, and a large-scale famine could strike at any time. The clouds of despair and disillusionment had shrouded everyone's heads. For this reason, I Ching had to take some soldiers who had written their wills and go to the outside world to find usable supplies to maintain their expenses. "Did you find anything useful?" I Ching asked, looking at Lin Qianxi's team coming back from the other direction. "I didn't find anything. It has been destroyed by the demonized beast." Lin Qianxi sighed and slumped her shoulders. She seemed to be in a bad mood. "What about you?" In fact, it wasn't that there was nothing. Some of the soldiers behind Lin Qianxi were holding some food that could be stored for a long time, such as bacon. However, compared to the entire refugee city, this amount of resources couldn't even be considered as a drop in the bucket. "It's almost the same here." I Ching looked serious. He took out an inverted triangular pendant from his pocket. The pendant exuded a white glow, but if you look closely you will find that the pendant's white jade-like texture had turned nearly 2/3 black. The amulet can't hold on any longer. We can only wait for 3 teams for half an hour at most. This time, we also returned without any results. Lin Qianxi's mood was even worse. She kicked a small stone on the ground like a child in a fit of pique. "It's good luck to be able to go back in one piece." I Ching comforted her with a wry smile. Suddenly, the brave young man's face stagnated. He turned around and pulled out the long sword behind his back. His action immediately touched the tense nerves of all the soldiers. They pulled out their weapons one after another. Even Lin Qianxi picked up a small staff. After a while, in the direction where visibility was quite low because of the black snow, several soldiers appeared. They were running toward this side and their figures looked quite awkward. "No way." Lin Qianxi tried to open her perception. After feeling the thing that chased them so awkwardly, she couldn't help but swallow. An expression of fear or confusion appeared on her face. The next moment, those things appeared in everyone's field of vision. Those were the creatures that were born after several humans were infected. No, perhaps it was not accurate to describe them as living creatures. They were monsters that were difficult to describe with words. It was as if they were scribbled by a person. Their entire body was made up of countless twisted and curved lines, and they did not have a specific outline. The size of the monsters ranged from small ones that were slightly larger than monkeys to huge ones that looked like moving villas. I Ching quickly estimated the combat effectiveness of the two sides in his mind and came to a conclusion. There was no chance of winning. What are those guys in the third group doing? They actually led the monsters here. Did they forget to go out to the field? Aren't you implicating us as well? Some soldiers had already begun to complain. I Ching understood them very well. In fact, before setting off from the refugee city, the city defense officer told him that it was better to let the soldiers die outside than to lead the monsters near the city. This was what they had discussed with the soldiers from the very beginning. The high salary and abundant supplies during this time of shortage were all for this moment. However, everyone's awareness was different. Situations like the third team were not uncommon. After all, not everyone could overcome the fear of death. "Everyone get ready to retreat. Lin Qianxi, I'll leave it to you," I Ching said loudly, and he was ready to rush in the direction of the third team. "Stupid I Ching, what do you want to do?" Lin Qianxi was anxious and grabbed I Ching's clothes. "If we want the others to escape, someone has to stay behind and block those things." I Ching turned around and said seriously. As a hero, although he couldn't kill those things, he could still stop them. It was just that whether he could come back in one piece after stopping them was another matter. "We will die. There is a stage 4 monster in there." Lin Qianxi shook her head hard. "And if you become one of those things? Don't worry, I'm different from others. The former hero's familiar little black seems to have left something on me. In short, compared to others, I should be the least susceptible." Although Su Xinxing didn't reveal the Valkyrie's blessing until the end, I Ching was not a fool. After training on the battlefield in the other world for so long, he had already vaguely noticed the existence of the blessing. But Lin Qianxi still wanted to say something, but I Ching put a finger against her lips. "The former hero didn't come here to pick us up as agreed. I'm afraid he was delayed because he encountered something similar. Since he chose to pass this power to me, I can't let him down." The young man said to Lin Qianxi gently but firmly, "I'll leave these people to you. You must let them return to the city safely. In the end, the girl nodded unwillingly and left with the soldiers. But before she left, she looked at him deeply as if she wanted to imprint his figure in her mind. After watching the girl's figure disappear in the black snow, I Ching smiled bitterly and said to himself, I actually used her heart. I'm really bad. But then his gaze became determined again. He let the soldiers of the third squad run past him. It was hard to say if these guys could make it back to the refugee city alive, but at least they had a chance of survival. I Ching looked at his slightly trembling hand and faced the monsters alone with his sword. He took a deep breath. In the name of the current hero I Ching, I will never let you hurt anyone again. Come at me. Chapter 661. The process of the battle was cruel and dull. No matter how powerful the sword strike was, it couldn't cut through the enemy's body, and offensive skills were completely useless like a stone sinking into the ocean. Even if he hit it over and over again until its shape collapsed into disorderly lines, it would regenerate after a short while. It wasn't an ability like super regeneration or immortality, but simply that his attacks were completely useless. That's right. Although it looked as if the enemy was injured, the fact that the enemy would fall back after being hit or the collapse of the outer form was simply the enemy's reaction after being attacked, and not a sign that the attack was effective. In fact, as one of the top combatants in this world, I Ching hadn't fought against these things for a long time. Under normal circumstances he would usually avoid them. It was the same this time. If the situation wasn't so critical, he wouldn't want to fight the enemy either. After experiencing the collapse of the world's order, these top powerhouses had long understood that the enemy couldn't be killed. Each time they fought against these things, it would only deepen the sense of helplessness and despair in their hearts. There were even many experts who were originally proud and arrogant who were crushed by despair after realizing this. They chose to give up resisting and were infected by malice, becoming one of these monsters. Cough, cough. In a moment of carelessness, I Ching was kicked by the monster that was as large as a villa. Even though he managed to block the monster's giant hoof with his weapon in the nick of time, the young man was still sent flying by the powerful force. He bounced on the ground for more than 10 meters before he rolled and stopped. He coughed a few times, feeling the dull pain in his chest slowly spreading. Did my ribs break? Before he could even catch his breath, the smaller monsters had already swarmed him. They weren't moving in an orderly manner, but as if they were fighting over something, they used their strange bodies to entangle and tear I Ching apart. From this point, it could be understood that these monsters didn't act as a commander like the Queen Ant. This was both a good and a bad thing. The good thing was that they didn't have a unified will to command them. Their movements were disorderly and aimless, and it was common for them to clash with each other. If that wasn't the case, as long as all the monsters charged together, even the most advanced refugee city would fall in the blink of an eye. And the reason why it was a bad thing was obvious. Without something like the Queen Ant, there was no way to eliminate the entire group of enemies in one fell swoop. Once a person's body was touched by them, they would immediately show symptoms of corrosion as if they were corroded by black snow. It wasn't the decay of the body, because no matter what method was used to diagnose the wound, it would be concluded that the victim was quite healthy. It was the corrosion of the soul on a deeper level. However, there were also many people who were torn apart by these monsters before they were completely contaminated. I don't know which type I will be. As the dull pain in his chest grew more and more severe, I Ching's basic offensive and defensive movements began to deform. This led to his body being touched by the monsters a few times in a row. His cloak had begun to rot, and his exposed skin had begun to show corrosive scars. It was like a special burn with a circle of dark skin on the outside, and a strange wound full of burnt yellow spots of pink flesh in the middle. A tingling and numbing sensation came from the wound, and I Ching even had the illusion that he was gradually being infected. I can't hold on any longer. I'm already at my limit. I Ching sighed and tried to retreat. But because he had stayed here for too long and the battle was quite fierce, many monsters in the surroundings had been attracted. Now he was surrounded by monsters. His attempts to break out of the encirclement ended in failure, and the wounds on his body were increasing. Looking at the densely packed monsters around him, I Ching finally realized that it was impossible for him to escape. Looks like this is as far as I can go. The youth leaned on his sword and lowered his head. The necklace around his neck also drooped down, but the pendant had completely turned black. With a crisp sound, the pendant shattered. The protection from Xia Shuiyao's holy power had completely disappeared. The black snowflakes finally came into contact with I Ching, and every snowflake that fell on his body would cause a puff of pungent smoke and a sizzling sound like roasted meat. Everything was over. But for some reason I Ching felt no fear in his heart. Even if we can't fight against you now, there will be a day when humans will find a way to restrain you. I Ching looked up and shouted at the monsters. He did not have much stamina left. In fact, it was difficult for him to even stand now, but the enemies were still charging at him tirelessly. The young hero shouted with all his might, "Then we will rise again and humans will win in the end." With that, he held the sword that had a chip on it to his neck. Even if he had to face hundreds of monsters, he would at least die in a place like this with his human body. At that moment, "Your will is not bad, but you lack a little hope and an unyielding spirit to fight to the end." He had never heard this voice before, but it sounded familiar to him. What followed was an incomparably loud whistle that would never appear in this world. The next moment, a wide path appeared in the middle of the densely packed horde of monsters that surrounded him, just like Moses parting the surface of the sea. The pitch-black steam locomotive sped through the middle and stopped beside the young man with a drift. "Mr. Former Hero?" Seeing the face that left a deep impression on him, I Ching's legs weakened, and he knelt on the ground. The surprise of survival made him, who was originally prepared to die, feel as if the last bit of strength in his body had been sucked out, and he was about to fall to the ground. At this moment, Su Xinxing had already appeared beside him, and brought this youth who was covered in wounds to Jasmine's side in the carriage. Wow, what exactly happened? Song Yu was still confused by the current situation. She hugged the expressionless Jasmine tightly as if she was hugging a doll. "Jasmine, protect the river moon." In reality, the river moon had already been blessed by Su Xinxing with the Holy Region's blessing. Otherwise, it would not have been able to be used as a vehicle to travel between worlds, so the black snow did not affect it at all. However, because the enemy was a little special, Su Xinxing told Jasmine to be safe just in case. "Leave it to me." Jasmine, who was carried in his arms, replied expressionlessly. Therefore, Su Xinxing stood in front of everyone and faced the monsters that were attacking like a black tide. "Mr. Former Hero, be careful of those monsters. They can't be killed." I Ching struggled to sit up and clung to the window of the river moon as a warning to Su Xinxing. "Ah, that's probably how it is for you." Su Xinxing turned 45 degrees and looked back at her. "No, I should say that it was about the same for me until half a year ago." He then blasted out a punch, and the black tide formed by the monster seemed to have hit an invisible wall. Not only did it stop abruptly, but it also directly rolled back. The few monsters at the front were also reduced to ashes. That's right, they did not crumble and turn back into lines but completely disappeared. Those who haven't experienced or witnessed the age of destruction can't harm it. Did you send me to Shiwei Adaric's world just to pave the way for this? Even if it's just shockwaves or echoes, it would still be considered as having witnessed the age of destruction, and could harm these guys who are also shockwaves? Su Xinxing retracted his fist and muttered to himself as he watched the monsters that were attacking fearlessly again. "No, for me in this world these guys should be a sign. A sign of destruction." Chapter 662. Azure Water City, which was backed by Lake Isabella, was currently the largest refugee city in the world. Azure Water City, which was originally a large trading city, had expanded a lot due to the large number of refugees moving in. However, due to the scarcity of building materials, the expanded area at the edge of the city was similar to the slums. Therefore, if one looked down from the sky, the gray area at the edge of the city, which was far larger than the main city area, looked like a spreading mold. In the center of the main city, the building that was originally used as a clock tower had now been expanded into a small castle. White light overflowed from the highest point of the castle, forming a hemispherical shield above the city to protect the residents in the refugee city from the black snow that constantly fell from the sky. In the room of the steeple, there was a durian-sized ball hanging from the ceiling, and a silver-haired girl was kneeling on the floor below the ball. Her head was lowered, and her fingers were clasped together in a praying posture. Holy light flowed from her body, and her appearance could not help but make people think of words such as angel and goddess. Holy power was discovered only 2 years ago. It was a power similar to magic. After the mutation, holy power was also proven to be one of the few powers that could resist the black snow. "Miss Xia, it's time to change shifts." A few people wearing white cloaks walked up the stairs at the edge of the room. Anyone who knew about the new church would know that the patterns on the white cloaks meant that they were bishops of the new church who had mastered powerful holy power. The old church had collapsed 3 years ago. This was the core of the refugee city, and the ancient magic core above the room would spread holy power to form a barrier that protected the city. Without this, the Blue Water City would soon become a living hell in the outside world. The girl was naturally Xia Shuiyao, who had transmigrated with I Ching. After her holy power was discovered, it was quickly determined that she possessed a gift of holy power that no one in this world could hope to attain. Usually, it would require 32 bishops to squeeze into this small room and pray together in order to achieve this effect, but she could do it alone. Even the strength of the barrier alone was far stronger than when there were 32 of them. However, she was still a human after all, and it was impossible for her to maintain the barrier without rest, so it was necessary for her to change shifts. All right. Xia Shuiyao stood up from the ground, her face showing signs of fatigue. She patted the dust off the edge of her dress and was about to leave the room. However, as she walked towards the stairs, she seemed to have thought of something and stopped in her tracks. She asked the leader of the bishops, "Right, I Ching and the rest should be back by now, right?" The bishop's face froze as if he did not know how to answer her. Although Xia Shuiyao looked like she did not say anything, she was actually quite sensitive and instantly realized what had happened. She did not make things difficult for him, but turned around and quickly ran towards the stairs. "Madam Xia, go to Her Royal Highness's mansion. You should be able to understand what happened there." The bishop finally could not stand the criticism in his heart and said to the girl. The latter only nodded and disappeared down the stairs. Because the capital had fallen, the royal family of the Frosthawk Empire could only move to Jade Water City. Although that was the case, in reality the only royal family member who had survived was the eldest princess. However, Her Royal Highness did not build a luxurious building at such a difficult time for the sake of the royal family's reputation. She only requisitioned a wealthy merchant's villa near the city center as her own mansion. When Xia Shuiyao arrived at the eldest princess's mansion, she found that Lin Qianxi and the eldest princess were talking about something. Both of their expressions were a little heavy and gloomy. It seemed that the content of the conversation was not pleasant. Lin Qianxi. After all, they had been together for 3 years, and the degree of familiarity between the three of them did not require the suffix classmate behind their names. Xia Shuiyao went straight to the point and asked, "Where is I Ching? Didn't he lead the team to search for supplies with you today?" Lin Qianxi's face darkened visibly, and she bit her lips tightly, unable to say anything. Xia Shuiyao's expression was serious, and she stared at her without saying a word. After a long while, Lin Qianxi seemed to use all her strength to squeeze out a sentence from her throat. "We encountered the spirit of chaos. In order to protect us." Although she could not continue in the end, Xia Shuiyao already understood what she was going to say. The blood on the girl's face suddenly disappeared and she became pale. She looked deeply at Lin Qianxi, her eyes full of disappointment, and then ran to the door without looking back. "Wait a minute, Miss Xia, where are you going?" The Frost Eagle Empire's Princess Royal asked anxiously. "To save I Ching. Please don't be so impulsive. I will immediately prepare a rescue plan for Mr. I Ching. As a precious clergyman, for your own safety, Miss Xia should stay in the safe Blue Water City and wait for news." The Princess Royal hurriedly tried to stop her. To be honest, the Princess Royal felt that the possibility of I Ching's survival was very small. After all, those monsters, also known as the Spirit of Chaos, could not be killed. Therefore, when facing them, it was the right choice to lure them to a more complicated terrain, and then escape from the pursuit. But according to Lin Qianxi's previous description, it was almost impossible to escape from dozens of Spirit of Chaos, and several of them were at stage 3. The only thing I Ching could do was to try his best to stall them. And he had not returned to Blue Water City until now, which also showed this point. No matter how powerful a warrior was, his physical strength and energy were limited. Sooner or later he would show weakness due to exhaustion and finally be killed. The fall of countless strong people in the early days of the Cataclysm had proved this point, even if I Ching was a hero from another world. Since that was the case, he should at least protect Xia Shuiyao, who was very important to Blue Water City. Her Royal Highness was not indifferent to I Ching's life. In fact, when I Ching helped Finn stop the war between the humans and the demons 3 years ago, she had secretly fallen in love with this man from another world. But she was the royal family of the Frosty Eagle Empire and the current supreme leader of Blue Water City. Her every word and action was related to the lives of more than 300,000 people in Blue Water City, so when she made decisions she had to try her best not to mix personal feelings, so sometimes she seemed even more ruthless. "Your Royal Highness?" "No, perhaps now I should call you Your Majesty. You seem to have made a mistake." Xia Shuiyao finally stopped, but she did not turn around. Instead, she said in a rare, cold tone, "I will stay here not because of how well you treat me or how many people I can protect and save here, but simply because I Ching is here." The other two girls in the room looked at each other silently. "Then, now that I Ching is not here, I will naturally not continue to stay here." Xia Shuiyao had no intention of caring about his feelings. She continued, "For me now, what's important isn't whether it's too late or not, but whether I can save him or not." After saying that, the girl took another step forward. "Wait!" The eldest princess loudly shouted and her eyes became sharp. "This princess will not let young Miss Ya send you to your death. Even if I have to use force, I will make you stay. Guards!" As soon as her voice fell, several heavily armed guards rushed in from outside the door. "Your Majesty, you can't possibly think that these people can stop me, right?" Xia Shuiyao's tone became even colder. Even if she was the weakest of the three people in I Ching's group, after nearly 3 years of experience, Xia Shuiyao's strength could be regarded as one of the top in this world. Not to mention a few soldiers. Even if she pulled out an army of 10,000 people to practice with, it was not certain who would lose and who would win. "I naturally don't think that a few ordinary people will be Miss Xia's opponent, so..." Her eyes fell on Lin Qianxi. "I ask Miss Lin Qianxi to make a move and stop Miss Xia from leaving here. I believe you also don't want to see your friends die in vain in the hands of the spirit of chaos, right?" As soon as she said this, Xia Shuiyao, who seemed to be a little careless, immediately became serious. She turned and stared at Lin Qianxi, and holy power invisible to the naked eye rose from her body. It was true that Xia Shuiyao was now quite powerful, but in terms of combat power she was still the weakest among the three people. Once Lin Qianxi became serious, it would not be easy for her to leave here. Lin Qianxi's expression was slightly sluggish, then she raised her hand towards Xia Shuiyao. In the next moment, the soldiers behind Xia Shuiyao were all sent flying by an invisible force and fell to the ground unconscious. "Miss Lin Qianxi." The Princess Royal was stunned and then looked at the initiator. At this time, the expression on Lin Qianxi's face seemed to have figured something out, and it was filled with a feeling of enlightenment. "Yes, I almost forgot my original intention. Shuiyao, let's go save I Ching together. Worthy of being my eternal opponent." Xia Shuiyao showed a rare smile. "Are you all crazy?" The Princess Royal couldn't help shouting angrily. But Xia Shuiyao and Lin Qianxi ignored her. At this moment, an ear-piercing alarm sounded from outside. Along with the alarm, there was a heart-wrenching scream from the lookout who was monitoring the outside situation through the lookout magic. "Be careful. There is a black cigar-shaped thing coming down the mountain." Chapter 663. Originally, Su Xinxing had come to this world with the mindset of a vacation to bring I Ching and the rest away. Otherwise he wouldn't have brought Song Yu, who had no combat power at all. Little did he expect that in just half a year, or almost 3 years to the people of this world had inexplicably reached the end of the world. "I see. So that's what happened." After listening to I Ching's story on the River Moon, Su Xinxing propped his chin on his hand and nodded. "Speaking of which, what about Finn and Elena? Didn't they take any measures to counter this?" In the early days of the cataclysm, after realizing that we couldn't kill the spirit of chaos, Mr. Finn and Madame Elena began to prepare the refugee city plan. Including Clearwater City, which we're going to next, more than half of the existing refugee cities in the world are the result of that plan. I Ching first showed a look of admiration, but then his expression dimmed. But after the refugee city stabilized about 3 months ago, Mr. and Mrs. Finn set off to the place where the meteorite crashed to investigate the cause of the cataclysm, and never came back. I Ching didn't go on, but Su Xinxing and the rest could probably guess that Mr. and Mrs. Finn were already dead. Finn and the rest weren't wrong. In the current situation, doing nothing would only lead to a temporary survival. Only by dealing with the source of the cataclysm could the crisis be completely resolved. Unfortunately, the danger of this trip had clearly exceeded their expectations. Su Xinxing couldn't help but fall silent. Even if Finn was only his temporary teammate in this world, he was still one of the few friends he had a little bit of friendship with. Su Xinxing naturally couldn't be happy that he had lost contact with him for no reason. And while it wasn't a big deal, Finn was still the hero of this world, and Elena was the demon king of the Great Devil Realm. Even if they escaped from this world, they would still be considered a big shot, and yet they were so inexplicably screwed up. This made Su Xinxing a little alert. It seemed that the omens of the Age of Destruction were more dangerous than he had expected. "But it's good that you're here, Mr. Hero. I really can't hold it alone." I Ching made an expression as if she was under great pressure, probably to ease the suddenly heavy atmosphere. This wasn't all flattery but I Ching's true thoughts. When he first transmigrated to this world, although he was directly involved in the war between humans and demons, there were still many strong humans at the time, and the human leadership was quite complete. As a hero, I Ching was mostly just following the plan and acting as a role model for the humans. He didn't have to think too much and he didn't feel too much pressure. But after the cataclysm began, the strong humans and demons who could shoulder the burden fell one after another, and the elites also died in large numbers due to the indiscriminate attacks of the spirits of chaos. So I Ching, the eldest princess, and the others who were in the second line suddenly took on the heavy burden that shouldn't have fallen on him. Especially after Finn and the others went missing, and the only person who could share their burden also disappeared. The burden of over 300,000 survivors suddenly pressed down on I Ching so much that he couldn't breathe. So now that he saw Su Xinxing and the others, I Ching was really happy. My surname is Su, just call me Old Su. Although your strength has barely reached the level of the hero, your mentality is still far from it. Su Xinxing patted him on the shoulder calmly. You still have to gain more experience. Then what do you plan to do next, Mr. Su? Because in I Ching's mind, Su Xinxing, who saved the world more than 10 years ago, was indeed at the level of a senior, so he had no objection to his tone of teaching the younger generation. Instead he asked with concern. Go to Blue Water City first, let me get more specific information, and then I'll go to the place where the meteorite fell alone. He was quite curious about the carrier that brought the destructive Jiu Bo to this world. In addition, although Jasmine should also be able to resist the aftermath of the era of destruction, it was better to let her stay here just in case. At the same time she could also protect Song Yu and Jiang Yu, which could be considered killing two birds with one stone. We're about to reach the next stop, Blue Water City. Before I Ching could express any opinions or suggestions on Su Xinxing's travel arrangements, Jiang Yu began to announce the stop. Su Xinxing poked his head out of the window and could indeed see the special city. In fact, Blue Water City was originally called Port of Blue Water. It was a city built on a huge island, and it was also the largest commercial port in the inland area to the sea through the Mystery River. The island looked like a huge eggplant inverted in the blue water lake. At present, more than 80% of the area had been occupied by buildings and shantytowns. It looked like a huge mildew on the eggplant. Only a small area on the side of the eggplant was connected to the outside world by a man-made stone bridge. The lake around Blue Water City was its natural barrier. Although the spirit of chaos could be regarded as invincible to the people in this world, it also had a specific set of behavior rules. Otherwise, human beings would have already typed GG, and Su Xinxing would not have the chance to save them. They would not cross some natural obstacles at will. That's right, although these non-physical things could pass through walls, they would not pass through natural things like stones. At the same time, although water was not harmful to them, they would not deliberately enter the water. Because of this, there were still so many refugee cities in this world, and the common point of these refugee cities was that almost all of them were built on special terrains with natural barriers. Su Xinxing poked his head out of the window and found that the River Moon was moving fast and steadily on the water. Not far ahead of them was the Water City, Blue Water City. Generally speaking, what will the refugee cities do when they notice the monsters approaching? Su Xinxing suddenly asked I Ching, who was in the car. Generally speaking, it's people like us who lure the spirit of chaos away. It's fine when there are only a few of them, but when there are a lot of them, it will be fatal. Besides, I heard that because there are not many powerful people in some refugee cities, they will sacrifice the lives of some civilians to lure them away. Although I don't know the reason, after killing ordinary people, the spirit of chaos will settle down in a very small area for a long time before continuing to move. I Ching replied, Her Royal Highness's scholars think that the spirit of chaos is increasing its own kind by infecting humans. But I guess that is the time it takes for them to digest humans. I will never admit that the spirit of chaos is transformed from a human. I see. Then I'm afraid that the city will think that we are a group of monsters. Su Xinxing also retracted his head back into the car and said calmly, Your two girls are flying over here. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.